Welcome, 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 one and all, to yet another episode of Wick, a cross ideological space where we
You
come
guys hear
together
me?
to talk about issues, political and cultural, from the silly to the serious. And today we have a show for you, gang. We will be discussing the state of emergency that was recently declared by the governor of New Mexico, citing mass shootings in May, as well as the death of a 13-year-old and 11-year-old by gun violence. They have decided to, by fiat, ban open and concealed carries in the city and the county where that city exists. It has gotten a lot of feedback, to say the least. There are people who are applauding its initiative, and there are others who say this is just a gross violation of constitutional rights and the Second Amendment. We're going to talk about it today. Not only the legality of it, but the morality of it. At what point is gun violence in America an emergency? And at what point should the leadership step in and say, okay, enough's enough. We can't get this through legislatively, so we'll have to use other means. Is that ever okay? And I guess we'll talk about it. And we're going to start with our lovely guest, Walter. Go ahead. Kick us off.
Okay, so I guess my whole perspective on the issue when it comes to these executive orders, I think, executive action suspending rights in the case of emergencies. I think there are a lot of justifications for these that we can think of, like edge cases. Overall, we don't really want this to happen, as long as they're not like suspending our right to our right to elections, our right to democracy. I don't think I think we can just vote them out afterwards. Obviously, if there are gross violations that happen during, and that this executive action doesn't seem to work really because the sheriffs don't seem to be willing to enforce it. And having a good enforcement mechanism, I guess, should be one of the most important things when it comes to trying to think of some kind of policy like this. And if the enforcement can't even work, we can't even really think of like what the outcomes would be. But I do think there probably are some like knock-on effects. There probably are some people who may have died from gun violence like today, maybe because of the banning that wouldn't have died. Maybe we can just kind of like have say that's a given, but is it worth, the suspension of our civil liberties? Is that worth like creating this kind of precedent? Um, it's definitely like a contentious issue. Overall, I think I defend the right for like the executive to have these kinds of powers in case of emergency. But if I don't agree with them and the way that they've enacted it, I'm totally down to then vote them out or try and impeach them. But I guess we'll be able to find out in court if this is constitutional or unconstitutional. And
Okay.
I cede my time.
Sure. I don't know if we have to wait for court. We are on WhickTV, so we get to give our opinions, right? And we'll see how that goes in the court of public opinion. Next up, we have Alec Gunter. Go ahead.
Hello, yes, I am 𝕬𝖎. As far as this legislation goes, I think that it's kind of a slap in the face to people who have been fighting for actual gun legislation that would help the gun crisis in America, which is very much present and needs to be addressed. I will say we have more mass shootings than other countries by leaps and bounds. Although when you break it down and look at statistically which guns are the most problematic, it tends to be most people think it's assault guns, assault rifles, whatever. It tends to be handguns like pistols, because those are the ones that people typically use for interpersonal violence and suicide. And those really are the two biggest issues when it comes to gun violence. So the way that we solve gun violence is, you have to solve underlying systemic problems. And if you want a more direct solution, you would use something like an application system where you would apply for a gun, have to wait maybe weeks to up to a month, whatever, in order to receive the gun, and that would prevent you from making any rash decisions involving the gun. Because what happens a lot of times is it's very easy to purchase and obtain a gun, and then you can use that to commit whatever acts of violence you happen to be, thinking about in the moment. So something like that would help. And then, like I said, really what we need is underlying systemic solutions, not just an outright gun ban. All this is going to do is spark outrage, especially among conservatives in the area, and it's just going to it's not going to result in anything good. You know, people aren't going to the police don't even want to enforce it. So I really don't know what they're going for with this. Not to mention it's temporary. You know, so I really don't know what they're going for with this. It just seems more like it seems like they were trying to jump to a swift solution without really thinking too much about it. So I'm against the legislation as it stands, although I am in favor of more gun legislation, just not like this.
Okay, I guess during the open, I'm curious to find out if there was any form of this, if they did it more strategically, wisely, etc., that you would be more okay with. But we'll get into it as we go. Next up, first time guest on my show, the 𝕵𝖎𝖎. Go ahead. What you got for us?
All right. I think I went a little cringe. I prepared a statement, so I'll try to decringify this. No, I'm just going to read it. Today, we stand at a pivotal juncture deliberating the decision of a governor to enact a temporary 30-day ban on open and concealed carry, particularly in cities with high gun crime rates. One distinction we're looking to draw upon is between the right to bear arms and the right to carry them in areas deemed sensitive. While our Constitution enshrines the right to bear arms, it does not grant unrestricted right to carry them anywhere and everywhere. In my opinion, 𝕵𝖎𝖎 is an American hero. Historically, across cities across America have enacted ordinances that regulated the carrying of weapons in specific public places. These ordinances are not arbitrary, they are precise, with targeted restrictions crafted in response to specific concerns. But that's not the heroic part of this order. Governor 𝕵𝖎𝖎's order, whether or not you agree with it, serves a purpose beyond its immediate intent. By pushing the envelope and testing the waters, it forces us as a society to confront and clarify the limits of the Second Amendment. It's bold and it's controversial, but in our system, it's only through controversy that clarity emerges. Inevitably, measures like these will be challenged in court, and it's through these challenges, these rigorous examinations under the lens of our judicial system, that we gain clarity. We need to know definitively what rights are guaranteed under the Second Amendment. We also need to understand the safety measures that are constitutionally permissible. Only by actively seeking out these boundaries, by testing and challenging them, can we hope to achieve a clear and consistent understanding of the relationship between our rights and our safety. Cringe over.
Okay. First of all, being prepared is not cringe. I will stand being prepared and coming with research any day of the week. So thank you for being here. We'll get into it as we go. It was fine. 8 out of 10. Solid intro. Speaking of solid intros, Fairy Queen, what you got for us?
So I'm going to try to keep it short because I'd like to just dive right into the back and forth. But I think that this is a clear example of a violation of the Second Amendment. I agree. There are many examples of sensible gun legislations that I think that we should pass. I think that are reasonable to pass. I also think that it's significant that 𝕵𝖎𝖎, a survivor of the Parkland shooting, came out and deliberately stated on his Twitter page that even though he supports more gun legislation, that doesn't mean he thinks that there's an exception to the Supreme Court, to the Constitution, to suspend your constitutional rights in the name of a public health emergency. And he was echoing the statements of Congressman Ted Lieu. In response to something that the 𝕵𝖎𝖎 said, which I know this is the intro, I do think it's worth mentioning that a federal judge has already blocked this in the state in Albuquerque. It seems as though the way it's playing in the courts right now, as though it's recognizing it as being unconstitutional. But I agree. I think it's important. This is what I'd like our conversation to be tonight. I am worried that it's going to devolve into what does sensible gun legislation look like? What should it be? As opposed to the second question, which I think is the real issue of tonight, which is under what circumstances and under what specific state emergencies is it okay to suspend certain constitutional rights, or is it ever okay? And I'm curious to hear what the rest of you guys think.
We will be curious to tell you. Thanks again for being here. Always a pleasure. And last but not least, the wild card himself, 𝕵𝖎𝖎.
Yeah, I'm coming into this. We are talking about open and concealed carry. That's what this executive order very specifically is mentioning. Open and concealed carry is ultimately a form of speech. I think that that form of speech is what we would call intimidation, and I think that yeah, like that light level of intimidation, all it's going to do is make gun owners themselves targets of criminals because you take them out first. I think that it is simply a benefit for all of society for these walking meat targets to be walking around with their guns holding them, just so they can go ahead and feel like they get their brownie points. I support that fully and entirely as a part of their speech, that they are willing to take the first shots so that way the criminal can go ahead and complete the rest of the spree. They are the meat shields, and they are the ones that we will put as the sacrificial lambs. They are based, and we should not infringe upon their rights if they are willing to give up their lives as such.
Fair enough. Okay.
Mhm.
And with that, we'll just kind of get into it. To echo Fairy Queen's sentiment, a judge has ruled on this, and there is pretty clearly unconstitutional, but that's not, I don't care about that at the end of the day, because we're asking under what conditions, if any, can we supersede or should we supersede legality and say, okay, this is too much, this is too dangerous, enough. Let's try other methods. Is that ever okay? Because I can imagine scenarios where I think most of us, if not all of us, would be like, okay, this isn't working. We need to do something. So I am curious to what you all think. And with that, the floor is yours. Open discussion. If you have problems getting in, let me see your hands, gang. Other than that, go ahead.
I
I
just
think
want
I
to.
want to see an actual court case before I'm willing to call this unconstitutional, because the governor declared a declaration of emergency to begin with, right? And if you declare a declaration of emergency, you do get to spend, like, certain rights as dictated by the Constitution. I don't think that this is necessarily unconstitutional, even if a single judge goes ahead and rules upon it. I also don't think that this argument that because sheriffs won't uphold this has any constitutional merit other than to say that the sheriffs themselves are acting unconstitutionally by not working through the vectors of power that they have.
If I could,
Again,
I'd be more interested in speaking about like the practicality of the legislation as opposed to whether or not it's constitutional. I just don't take much stock in that personally. That's just me. And also, I had a question for
agree.
the. Is that the Dalai Lama?
Dalai Lama?
Okay, sorry, I can't see your name because I'm on streamer mode.
You're good.
But well, not a question. I do wanted to say, I'm open to being swayed on this. Like, if you can prove to me that this would work to reduce gun violence, I'd be for it. I just don't see how it would work. I have no clue.
Well, that's one benefit of this order is it's kind of groundbreaking. We don't have a lot of examples of good of limitations like this being placed in a short amount of time, and it seems like part of the intent of this order was to gather data in a way that's not
So, when is the last time that outright banning something has reduced its prevalence?
well.
I can't speak to that, but just a fact check here. In 2020, Ralph Northam actually issued a temporary ban on firearms on state capitol grounds ahead of a gun rally. So there has been other times where short temporary bans have been put into place by Fiat that have gone through.
Did that work?
What do you mean by work?
Like, did it reduce gun violence? Like, did it have the intended effect?
Well, I don't recall any gun violence being at the locations where it was banned, but whether it actually prevented anything, how can we know? That's
okay. Well, then that's,
that
I mean,
make
that's
sense?
fine. It just seems like that what you said then right there was a little bit irrelevant to what I was trying to say, because
Fair
I'm
enough.
trying to say like let's take prohibition of alcohol, for example, back in the early 1900s. That did not work. Like, the only thing that accomplished was people went underground and started doing, they would just sell alcohol on the black market and, drink it in private. I mean, same with weed, any illicit drug, it just doesn't work as far as I've seen, at least.
So if we're looking for situations where this worked, it's really hard to gather data on this. Laws like this exist. There are dozens of local cities that have ordinances in place that prohibit open and concealed carry in places like churches, schools, and even as open as social gatherings. Um, election precincts, courtrooms, and even public assemblies. A lot of cities in Missouri, for instance.
Well, yeah, but those are like isolated areas with specific circumstances. When you're
Well, that's
talking about the public venue, I don't think that banning guns, like the concealed and open carry in public spaces, at least there are certain public spaces that I would agree. But I think for the most part, the public space, open carrying and like banning open carrying, as far as I can tell, wouldn't solve anything based on the data we have of trying to ban other things.
well, yeah, that's the problem is the limitations of the data that we have now. Based on data, there's a bunch of major talking points that are said, like they say 77, but it's actually 65% of the 64% of the amount of guns that are used in mass shootings are legally obtained. But that's an argument for this the sale side level. But I would say these specific areas like churches, schools, social gatherings, election precincts, courtrooms, public assemblies, these limitations being a blanket ordinance over the whole city is actually more of a clampdown and more of a deprivation of rights than the idea that there's a threshold, like in this order, of if you are in an area that is specifically meets a if you meet a threshold of a certain amount of gun violence, then that's when the provisions kick in. So it's not altogether a ban throughout the state. It's a ban if you are in, I guess we would call it a sensitive area based on that threshold.
Okay. I don't want to hog the spotlight or anything, but I guess another part of this that we're not addressing is that the guns are already out there. So, like, if you're going to do a gun ban, I guess if you do a gun ban in public areas, you can still keep a gun in your house, and that's legal. Um, but since the guns are out there, I wouldn't want somebody who has a concealed carry license to get bombarded by police officers and arrested because they are now, maybe they weren't even aware that like the legislation went into place, and now they're going to be arrested because they previously were a law-abiding concealed carrier, but now they just are not because they're breaking the law and they didn't even know it.
Well,
So
an
I guess I'm
important
just
There's
concerned.
plenty of
That
examples of police in places where conceal open carry is totally fine, and they get a call from a person, you get approached with the gun, and then those interactions don't end well to begin with. So even without that, the cops are still going to fuck with you, even if the laws are there.
It's really important to know that there's a distinction. This is
is
not
fair, by the way.
this is not a legal. I mean, this is not a criminal penalty. This is a civil penalty. If you're caught, you get a $5,000 fine.
Okay. I'm not clear on all the details of the legislation, so thank you.
Oh, so it's just a penalty for the poor then.
Yeah, that's a
It could be
pretty
argued
massive
that way.
fine.
Yeah.
That is true.
I want to hear
Okay.
from Walter. Walter's trying to get in here. Go ahead.
No, that is a pretty massive fine either way. If you hadn't heard of the ordinance, but I think that's why we have like some of our police officers can, issue some discretion in how they apply some of these things, or let you know, like if you get pulled over with no permit or something, or your tags are out, they might give you a warning the first time. There's a lot of stuff like that. But I just wanted to push back against the whole thing that banning doesn't help anything. I think like banning, if we did, I don't know if we want to sacrifice our civil liberties just to get these effects, but I don't think we can deny that the effects kind of like would exist. There are, I think I've seen a few studies that say that banning open carry does affect overall fatalities and like reports of people going to the hospital. Just a thing of like prohibition. I mean, do we want to like look at Colorado and see if like weed consumption has increased since they legalized it? I think that like prohibition, it still exists. There's still a kernel of it, but by banning something, it forces it underground, and thus there's less people, accessing it, less people using it. So I think we should just like at least be honest that like the ban probably does save some people's lives, but is that worth an executive order coming in and changing our rights, even if just temporarily?
I guess When we talk about drug restrictions, right? We say heroin, like heroin is illegal. Why do we say it's illegal? Because it's an illicit drug that only serves to harm somebody, and it's highly addictive, et cetera, et cetera. But by making it illegal, all you're doing is preventing somebody from being able to get it. But why is somebody seeking it out in the first place would be my question. If somebody's seeking out a gun in order to commit some kind of act of violence, that's the root of the problem, not the gun itself. So I would like to solve underlying problems in that person's specific circumstances that would prevent them from wanting to do that in the first place. You see what I'm saying?
No, yeah,
I think
I
the-
understand where you're coming from. I'm just
Yeah.
wondering if like there's the whole perspective of like there's your we could go down your road and but let's say maybe that would take like 15 years of like new socialization and like changing people's whole perspective. And then let's say over the course of 5 years, instead, we could like get everybody's guns out of their hands. And in these like same time periods, we achieve the exact same end, the exact same goal. But in one of them, we like stomp over people's civil liberties. And but you would prefer to go the 15-year route instead of the 5-year route?
I'm not even I don't even know if I'm necessarily in favor of banning guns at all. Like I want restrictions on them, but I still think it should be your legal right to own them. So if you can curb somebody's inhibition,
Like
or
open
not
carry.
inhibition, their what's the word? I can't think of it. Their motivation, sorry, to carry out the violence to begin with, then you wouldn't need to ban the guns. You know what I mean?
Guns are just to interject here. Guns are almost like the aesthetic of this because we can imagine scenarios where something else is being targeted because of a state of emergency. Freedom of speech, for example. If there was a huge amount of harassment, hate speech, etc., that was targeting minorities and things like that, and a governor decided to put a blanket ban on slurs being used in public like that. We can imagine scenarios. So the guns are almost tangential. The gun debate's interesting, but I'm more curious about everyone's lines of when can the government or when can a leader overstep and trample your rights. Say, okay, your right does not supersede the public safety. And so I'm curious, and I want to get Fairy Queen in on this because she asked a question, so I want her to answer her own question. Where's the line for you?
I'm not sure. And that's the real answer. And the reason why I have that answer is because I'm not an attorney. I don't have that level of case law or background to tell you exactly. What I would say is like when we're talking like I realize that it might be boring, as you put it, Rez, to worry about whether or not the human meat shields should have the constitutional right to flash their pistols off in public, right? But I'm not sure I care that it's boring, right? Would we be talking about this, like banning or suspending a constitutional right of any other type for any other public or state health emergency that occurred, right? So an example that would we be talking about whether or not the policy would be effective in the same way if we were targeting a different constitutional right? So I can give you an example. One of the things that I considered like before coming on this panel is 9/11 isn't a good example. That was a public health emergency. Thousands of people died. The World Trade Center had been destroyed. And there were many policies that were implemented in New York as a consequence to try to target ethnic minorities and try to target Muslims within New York. I think that if we were talking about that specific issue, I'm not sure we would be talking about, well, like, let's see if I could find one of the examples here. I'm not sure if we would be discussing the efficacy of those policies. I think what we would be talking about is regardless of whether it's effective or not, the state doesn't have the right to to create a demographics unit or to create a zone assessment unit, right? And to monitor and to infiltrate Muslim communities and institutions, right? We would have a very different perspective if we were talking about that issue, right? And so as horrific and tragic as gun violence is, as horrific and tragic as it is when the 11-year-old boy was shot and killed and his aunt was permanently disabled, if we wouldn't have this kind of conversation in the aftermath of 9/11, I'm not sure why, because the aesthetic issue happens to be gun violence, we would be doing the same thing with this issue.
I mean, if we're not going to have the conversation, well, what do you mean we're not going to have the conversation? We've had the gun conversation is 3 decades old at this point. Like, we've had places where people have pretty much outright banned them, right? The only difference this time is that the sheriffs are completely superseding even legislative authority to begin with, right? Like, that's what's happening here. That's, like, I think the weirdest part about this. I'm going to be honest. I know that, like, they've kind of trimmed this all back to be like parks, public places, churches. I think that's good. I think generally speaking, where little kids are and shit, probably don't want to have a lot of guns there. And if you do, they probably should be trained individuals that have those guns. We've been having this gun conversation forever about banning them, and it's that simply probably won't happen, right? We will have like some level of like, the sheriffs just aren't going to enforce it. If that's like the case, then it's all like null and void, right? Like, no matter what, if you have like a police like force that isn't going to do anything, what's the point of even having a conversation about like what laws we can do? The cops are going to do what the cops are going to do if we don't actually like bring that in, right?
But
Like,
it's
I'm
not
not
even
like I do think that that's like actually important, because like laws don't matter if you don't actually do anything with them. It's illegal to sleep outside on top of a refrigerator in Pennsylvania, but nobody gets charged with that shit because the cops aren't going to do that. They're not going to bother with it, right? Like, that's, I think, the bigger issue here is there's literally nothing we can do to actually go ahead and stop like gun violence. So
I guess part of the question that I have here, and I have the actual ordinance pulled up in front of me. It says, on private property that is not open to the public with like, what do we mean when we say out in public? Because I don't disagree with you, Rezi. I don't think that like people should be allowed to have open carry on a school campus, right? But like when we're saying you should not be able to have open carry in public, what does that mean? Does it just mean schools? Like the example that was given before, I think wasn't that specific, and you are free to correct me, that was on the Capitol grounds, right? That was not out in public anywhere in the state with it throughout the state. That was in a very specific location. I think there is a difference between saying there are locations where you can open carry, places in public where it's appropriate to do so, as opposed to a blanket ban saying in no area should it be legal, even temporarily, for you to open carry. I think there's a difference between that.
Yeah, because I'd like to add on to that. We do that with alcohol, right? Like it's your legal right to drink alcohol, obviously, and even in public places, but you can't drink it in the car. You can't drink it on school grounds if you're in an elementary school, which even if it's a public school, technically public property. Like, if you're like blasted in a public park in broad daylight, you're probably going to get in trouble. Just for like public indecency. So like, I think reasonable restrictions are the way to go, not an outright ban, because outright bans on alcohol clearly did not play out well. Otherwise we would still have them, right?
Well, this wouldn't be an outright ban. Does anybody else value the idea that there is the specificity in the way they classify the area, the cities or the counties that the bans are enacted? I feel like that is the idea that as long as you have a higher level of danger that's like pertinent to the order itself, I feel like that's a better level of specificity than even just saying churches or just saying schools.
Let me ask this, because 9/11 was mentioned, I think, as a good parallel.
9/11 was bad.
Let me give you a let me give you a hypothetical. There is a mass shooting. Cool. Reports come in. They're all pretty clear. Black man was seen gunning down kids and fleeing the scene. Do any of us have a problem, and please be honest, with the police stopping black men in that area to question them or to find out, like, search them for a gun, detaining them maybe if there's any kind of suspicion? Does anyone here have a problem with the police doing that in the immediate aftermath of a violent event like a school shooting? Is there anyone here?
I mean, a black person shoots up a school, okay, and then like a half hour later, people are checking out black men in the vicinity, right?
Yes,
like that's
yes.
effectively it. Yeah, I think the cops are going to do that regardless. Like, that's
But
probably
does
just.
anyone think that's a overstepping bounds, racial profiling, bad,
Well,
racist?
if it was
whatever?
a
It's
white guy,
necessarily
if it was a
racial
white guy,
profiling.
the same thing. I would say we were
Yes.
trying to stop every white man. If it was a,
Mhm.
diminutive statured white woman, for instance, with
Well,
a really sassy snarl,
if
right?
you
Yeah,
get
absolutely. Same
if you
thing.
get like 50 reports saying, yeah, we saw this guy, he was like very dark skinned black, he had a shaved cut, he was 6'2", 240 pounds, whatever, and then you have police stopping like black women or
With
black
dreads or
people who are
something.
like 5'2" with dreads down to their hips,
Yeah.
like that's racial profiling. You need to actually match the description.
Oh, well, here's the thing that I think. What if you've got like multiple guys who kind of fit the profile in the vicinity? Is it okay for the police to approach them with a gun out, kind of gun drawn, telling them to put their arms up, hands up, like freeze, because there's a school
No.
shooting suspect? I think that might be generally okay if there's like a guy who fits the description and is a potential school shooter, potentially armed and dangerous. Of course, the police should
I
like throw him.
agree. You cannot have state officers drawing weapons on people who are just going about their business. You have to approach them peacefully and talk to them.
Even if they match the exact description of
Yes,
a
even if
armed
they
and
match the
dangerous
exact
person.
description. Yes.
Yeah,
Okay.
because even in that case, the whole thing should be de-escalation. Like, even somebody
Yes.
with a gun isn't
I'm.
necessarily going to start shooting
This is gonna.
immediately. There was
This
that
is.
one kid in a high school that
Well,
brought a
they
shotgun who got a hug from his gym teacher,
This
and
is
he
gonna.
just gave up on
in this
This is gonna sound
hypothetical,
morbid.
they just shot though, right?
This is gonna sound morbid, but
Mhm.
police officers signed up for the job where you might die. Okay, so it is incumbent upon them to take that risk instead of immediately assuming anybody in the vicinity might be a threat.
Also, is racial profiling necessarily bad in that instance?
Well, like I said, if they're
I
just
think it,
stopping
I
any
think
old
it's a
black person,
misuse.
then yes, they
I
have to
think it's
actually
like a
match the
misuse.
description.
But this was an active shooter that got away, right? From a school.
Yes. Now, if the
Yeah.
only description you have is like the only consistent description is just hypothetically
race.
speaking, I guess, is the guy was black. We don't know anything else about him except he was black. We don't know
Black
how
and
tall
wearing
or
a
short he
hoodie.
was for some reason. Right. Then I guess that would be necessary, but you still have to approach them peacefully, say, where were you at this time? Like you have to have a reason to approach them. You can't go like 5 miles out 30 minutes after. Well, I guess that'd be reasonable, but like, 20 miles out, you get my point. Like it's got to be reasonable.
But there is a situation like that where there is a way to reasonably and rightfully do racial profiling.
You can call it that if you want, but
Well, strictly
guess
by the
technically-
definition. Yeah.
okay,
Well,
I guess technically it is.
I mean,
but-
yeah, it's going by no, it's not racial profiling. It's going by a description. Like,
Right.
I'm sorry,
I would
like
say-
that's the thing.
I would
If
say
you
that's a
had very tan
mischaracterization.
person that
Well,
might
racial-
fit that. Like, if you
Well,
say
yeah,
it's
that's
like a
not what
light skinned
racial
person, it's a
profiling-
very
Racial-
tan person, then yeah,
Ra-
guess what? Like, that's that'd be something that's in there.
Well, no, this isn't what racial profiling means. Just
Well,
Well, yeah,
deciding
I
someone
understand
based on
that.
race.
That's what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say.
You're
Yeah,
using
I don't
it-
want to. I don't want to get into like what is racial profiling. The point of the question,
Oh.
the reason I ask, is because under normal circumstances, we'd be a little like, we can imagine the cops in this scenario approaching people. We all say it should probably be peaceful. It's not going to. It's going to be a little more aggressive. I think that's natural. I think that is unavoidable. I understand that, right? That they're going to be on edge. They're going to be looking for someone who has demonstrated they are lethal and dangerous and armed, and so that there's going to be a little more on there. So I think reasonable people would make like, okay, we understand why they're doing it this way. We get it. I'm trying to tie this in the idea of the government, a leader, seeing what they see as a health crisis, as a crisis, something that is ongoing, active, an active
Mhm.
danger to the community, and taking steps that normally, under normal circumstances, if this health crisis did not exist, no one would be okay with. But seeing as it does exist, we're like, okay, maybe we should allow this in this case. So my question is, where's our lines? And that's what I'm trying to figure out. How many people, Fairy Queen, I'll ask you again to start, and I want to hear everyone answer though, right? At what point would you be okay with a ban like this? How many people dying a day in a locality towards gun violence would it take for you to be like, okay, maybe we need to put just a fiat order on this and try something, right?
I don't know what the legal precedent for this. I would say
I'm not
probably
talking legality here. The constitutionality of it, the legality of it, set it aside for a moment. My question is, for you personally, whether it's legal or not, would you be like, okay, governor or leader, mayor, whatever, step in, do something?
it would probably for me personally, it would probably be a series of mass shootings. It would have to be like a series of a lot of people being murdered in mass consistently, like at least twice, in order for the governor to step in and to have a motion like that.
Okay.
It would not. And that's an extreme bar. It's extreme for a reason.
I'm curious what. So Dalai Lama, you're for the order now already, right? So your bar is probably a little lower.
I'm for the order for a couple reasons. One of them is for the moral question. I don't believe that there's anything moral. I believe owning a gun or having the right to own a gun is amoral. But the only reason why we have a moral attachment to owning a gun is because we see it, rightfully so, as a right that's guaranteed by the Constitution. So
Right.
at that point, we would be deprived of a human right that we see within our society.
Rezi, how many people before you're like, okay, governor, do your thing?
3 standard deviations over the norm as per average of capita deaths in like the United States, I think is a fair way to go ahead and look at it. Like that's, I think, like if we're going to be looking at numbers wise, that's like what, like around like maybe 1.3% of like locales. And like we can examine like why there is such a higher per capita rate of gun violence. And I think that this would ultimately lead to the disarming of rural communities entirely. Because I think gun violence is per capita very prevalent in a lot of rural communities. I know that like Albuquerque right now is at like the second most murders or something like that in the nation right now. It's like becoming like the new murder capital. So yeah, I think Albuquerque is probably a good place to start, if anything. It seems like it is probably one of the most dangerous areas. But if it came to like just a place where those aren't happening, it's like, all right, well, maybe they actually have a culture that somehow like allows for this to be okay. But I would probably go with statistics there of approximately 3 standard deviations off mean.
3 standard deviations. So if normally it's 10 people a year that get killed, and suddenly it's put that
It would
into
probably
layman's
like it would probably be like if it's 10 people per year normally it'd be like 98, but I
You know
think
what'd
it's
be-
normally 1.1 person. So I'm probably looking at around like 10 to 11, I think.
You know what
dying.
a legitimately good legislative action would be? Free healthcare for a month. Not a gun ban, free healthcare, mental, physical, whatever, for 1
Okay,
month.
so
from
we
the
have
state.
10 school shootings in a month in a location, and your answer to that is free healthcare?
Free
Yes.
gunshot wound
Save the ones
heals.
that live.
Wow. That'll help them out.
Well, I think
I mean,
it
it
won't help
would.
the people who already died, but then again, neither will the gun bans, will they? What I'm
I mean, I
saying
think-
is,
I mean,
if
they
you
might.
solve the underlying problems, if you have, okay, so people don't just go and shoot up schools, right? There's an underlying issue there. They have maybe a familial problem, they have a mental problem, probably a combination of both. Maybe they've been bullied. You know, it doesn't. There are all kinds of circumstances. Maybe they're on alt-right forums on 4chan. We have seen plenty of those. So why do they go to these places? Why do they do the things they do and think the things that they think that lead to the actions that they then take? A lot of the time, it's because they don't have access to basic resources like healthcare. So if you want to effectively solve this crisis, you need to open up access to these things that they don't have that lead to these violent outbursts, such as mental health care.
But
Yeah,
wouldn't
so
that be like
that just straight up wouldn't work because those people that are doing this are most often isolates who have refused outward help over and over again, and we see this happen in all the patterning. Those like putting free mental health care, totally based. Absolutely, we should have free health care. All right, that's cool.
How about this? How about this?
But the thing is,
yeah, I don't-
How about
those
this?
people are the people that are doing
Incentivize
this
it.
aren't even going to. How are you going to
Incentivize it.
incentivize
You
somebody
say
who has
we will
no
give you
governmental trust to
$100
begin
check.
with?
Write them a
Yeah.
$100 check.
But
Go
in the
see a
amount of time-
psychotherapist. $100 check.
Have you
Here,
ever
done.
have you
Here's-
ever
here's the thing.
experienced trying to find the meds that work for you? That
Yes.
solution itself isn't necessarily an instant solution.
But at least it's a start. These
Well, yeah.
people have nothing else. You don't go to shoot up a school if you've got something to lose.
Yeah, this way we get them to turn themselves in so we can put them on a list and we can observe them and remove other rights from them, like the right to privacy.
Here's one of the things that I think that we should bring up is that one of the mass shootings that really triggered a lot of this was an 18-year-old boy was just like walking through like a neighborhood, I think shooting through buildings with like a gun that he had gotten, had like 6 victims or 3 killed, 6 injured. This guy had free healthcare. He's a child. He's a minor. He's getting healthcare. He's like an isolated individual. He doesn't know a lot about the world to get himself to like his own kind of psychiatric facility that will test him out. Like, not all of these people are going to step forward and like vouch to say like, hey, you know, I'm having bad thoughts. I want you to take care of them. Maybe if we raise prevalence of that, that would help with some things. But overall, I just the thing where I think maybe we would call in a public health safety is when like the average person, the average individual who is an open carry person is getting into like gunfights, like the Old West and like the town square. At the end of the day, it just doesn't seem like some of these open carry bans are going to prevent what this guy was going out to do, which is the thing that was the impetus for all this. We can talk about where the average gun deaths come from, the accidents in the home, the not storing them properly, but like the thing that triggers all of these is always mass shooting events that will probably still be prevalent without these kinds of with these kinds of legislation.
Can I lay out an example?
Yes, but after you do, I want Fairy Queen to be able to respond. So lay out your example, and then we'll get to that.
I'll make it quick. You have a guy, like I said, that has nothing else to lose. Okay, maybe he was abused as a kid. He lives alone in a dumpy old studio apartment with its run down, whatever, Cheeto dust all over his beard, whatever. 4chan boards, alt-right. You know, I'm painting a picture. This guy has nothing else to lose. So he says, you know what? Screw it. I'm going to go out and I'm going to do a mass shooting. And so you have 2 worlds. Three worlds. One is he has access to a gun, right? Easy access. And he just goes and does it. The second one is he doesn't have access to a gun, right? No access, period, end of story. He can't get one. Well, now what do you have? Now you have somebody who is homicidal, suicidal, has nothing going for him on alt-right boards. Mental health is a mess. And all he wants to do is go and commit a mass shooting. And so what is our solution? We're going to take the gun from him. And so now it's just some crazed lunatic who happens to not have a gun. And then we say, okay, we solved it. Okay. And then world number 3 is he could get access to the gun and he could go do a shooting, or we give him a second option, a very easily accessible one. We say, let's take a look at what's actually causing you to want to do these things, and let's try to solve it from there. I feel like that's reasonable. And I feel like the other panelists here just don't see that.
Okay, so let me ask you a question before. I'm sorry, Fairy Queen. Just I'll be quick. You know what? No, I'll ask after. Fairy Queen, go ahead. Don't let me talk over you.
I think that we are united in agreement that it's probably a combination of good gun legislation and good access to mental health care. It's not an either or. There's a middle ground that can be found, I think. But I don't want to change the subject. I do want to make the comment, though. One of the reasons why I don't have a great deal of experience with guns, but we have all lived through a public health emergency already, right? I think we are all in agreement that quarantining, being required to wear a mask in public spaces, being required to be vaccinated if you were going to public school, there are certain examples of policies that are implemented that I think most people would agree would be reasonable, right? Especially in the state of a public emergency when that happened during 2020. But unfortunately, I agreed with those policies. I agreed with those being enforced. What I noticed, however, that summer is the same thing that everyone else here noticed. I noticed peaceful protesters going out into the streets with with signs and being sprayed with rubber bullets. I noticed, as many of you did, journalists with press passes, with cameras, going in and trying to videotape what was happening at these scenes and being arrested with no reasoning, without any justification whatsoever. It even happened live on CNN. There was a reporter who was following a group of police officers who were trying to control one of the protests. and he was arrested immediately just for being on site. And he was a reporter, and he had a press badge with him, right? So this is the part that I am concerned about, right? I agree that there are absolutely things that we should do in the state of a public health emergency. There are reasonable things that we can do. But we have to be careful that they align as closely as we can to our constitutional rights, because if we don't, then what we can often see is law enforcement will take advantage of it, and it will abuse the rights, the very precious few rights that you have, right? I remember living at home at the time and worrying sincerely that our city was going to become a police state at that time. I'm not certain that anyone in here wants to relive that summer. And I think we can find numerous examples of other public health emergencies or other public emergencies that have happened where the state responded by restricting the civil rights of its citizens. The Japanese internment camps, for example, post Pearl Harbor, the stop and frisk and increased surveillance of the demographics unit and the zone assessment unit post 9/11 in New York is an example of that. And so I think that it's just too pat to throw out this concern about like, well, okay, I don't really care about the Constitution. I care if it works. We only care about that as long as your toes aren't getting treaded on. And I'll hang up there.
Okay, any responses to that before I have my question for Mr. Gunter here?
It's only a crime if you don't get caught. And again, like, we don't have equal enforcement of these things. Like, guess what? Like, we didn't actually have lockdowns, like, in America. That just fundamentally did not happen. Some communities chose to do it. Most communities didn't. Like, it was a constant battle where you didn't have law enforcement officers that were even going along with this. We are past the point where we can pretend like a governor can enact these things. You can't have power without being able to actually enforce that power, right? Governors don't have the power to do that. The federal government doesn't have the power to do that. It stands with the police. We are at the behest of the police, and that is all we have. We have to hope the police want the best for us, and chances are they don't.
One thing I want to put out there, when we did COVID restrictions and a lot of people were out of work, what did we do? We didn't give them enough, but we gave them money, right, in the form of checks so that they could stay at home. They were incentivized to stay at home, right? We should have done more, but point is we did it. So if you're going to, I'd be willing to compromise on this and say, okay, let's ban public carry of guns for a month, right? Let's do that. But then at the same time, while we're doing that, let's actually address the root of the problem. Let's get these, let's do a public health care initiative. Let's incentivize people to go seek care, right? And then at the end of this month, we can, slowly start to open up the public back up to public carry. I think that would be a fantastic solution.
Okay, I want to interject here because I hear this all the time. Like, we need to solve the root issues of the problem. If we just give people free healthcare, they can get their mental health checked, and they will have a huge drop in violence and things like that. I think that misidentifies the source of the violence. These people, right, really believe in their heart of hearts that they are not crazy. They don't feel they need any healthcare. What they feel is they feel under attack in most cases. They feel that their life is being taken from them, that they've written manifestos on this, like they're being replaced. The reasons vary, but that is a common one that we hear from a lot of
throw them
people.
in a psych ward.
Right?
Throw them in a psych ward and throw away the key. That solves the problem, right?
Does it?
Yes,
yes,
that
and
will
would-
not get
what you
abused.
just
That
said-
won't
what
get
you just
abused
said
whatsoever
would
to
solve the
like
problem.
prison
That would solve the
political
problem.
dissidents or
That's
anything
less
like
of
that.
a strip
Just-
of
just
rights
throw
I
them
mean,
or
like, we
freedom.
can look at how that worked out in Waco, right? Like, we can look at how that worked out in other these places where they've come in to
Just
try to forcibly
to be clear.
remove them. I mean, yeah, maybe it'll work, but we'll end up in gunfights anyway. And
To
so
be
I
clear,
guess the
but-
question here is, like, I understand that free healthcare is a good thing and we should have it. I just don't think it's a solution to this problem, because I don't think this problem is as connected to mental health and access to mental health facilities as we would believe. That's my only contention.
Yeah, it's
But
connected to economy
it is
more than I think anything else.
intrinsically connected to mental health care. Like you just said it. These are people who feel like they have no control. Like
Okay, if they
everything's
feel
been
that the
taken from
state
them.
is okay, if they feel that the state is out to get them, the state offering them to go to their free healthcare and take their pills isn't going to move them. They aren't going to be going to seek out these services. They're not going to take advantage of these institutions and services at all. Why would they? They feel that the state is the enemy.
That's why I'm saying incentivize it. Or you could have, and
Wait,
another
how do you
part of this,
how do you incentivize something that
well,
someone
just
doesn't
hold
believe
on,
in whatsoever?
hold on.
Right?
Another part of this is preventative. We don't just want to reach the people who have already hit the point of no return. We want to hit people who are on that trajectory, right? I'm an RN, a nurse, and a big part of what we learn in nursing school is preventative healthcare. And we simply do not have access to that in America. And that's why we have all the health problems we do: obesity, heart disease, high blood pressure, whatever else, mental health crises. These are all things that we could catch if we had a good preventative mental health or healthcare system in general. And mental health care is part of that, right? Preventing people from sliding down this path so that, if you catch these people before they reach that point, that's really what the initiative would be targeting, right?
Well, the Jacksonville.
I have a
oh,
question for
go ahead.
Alex. Sorry.
Sure.
Alec, do you believe in God?
No.
Okay.
Or at least I should
you know
say,
that like when you die, you're going to hell and you're going to burn for all eternity in absolute miserable, agonizing pain for all eternity. No matter
Right.
what you do, if you don't start believing in God, that's going to happen to you, right?
okay, you can believe
right.
that if you
Okay,
want,
yeah. So this
yes.
is what you're trying to do to talk to the schizos that are getting voice in their heads telling them to shoot up schools.
I
You're
know,
not
okay.
going to get through them. That's the
So-
God that I'm talking
Okay,
about.
but that's where therapeutic communication comes in. Another
Mhm.
tool that we learn in nursing. If you have good training in mental, I mean, let me put it this way. I had somebody break into my my addiction clinic once. This actually happened. He broke in, door was left open, and this guy was off his hinges. Okay, he was quoting Bible verses. He was talking about how it was unreal. I've never seen anything like it since or before then. And so I couldn't get close to this guy. I wanted to try to get close to him and check him out medically, but I couldn't. So what did I do? I called the EMS, and I started distracting the guy. Right? I start saying, "Listen, you seem like a religious guy. Why don't you tell me more about the Bible?" Right? Just let him kind of talk himself out until somebody with the tools that can stop him safely and escort him to get the mental health that he needs arrive. So, like I said, this is a skill. This is a
trainable skill that you were trained on, right?
correct.
All right, so just like a random storekeeper is going to get trained on that and has like free availability to like these
I'm saying if you
tactics.
you guys, okay. I'm trying to say that an initiative that I like, the one that I am describing, would prevent future shooters from being a problem. Like if you were to let's take a different crisis. Let's say obesity, right?
I think it would
You're
just
not-
be easier
okay.
if you said it'll prevent some,
Just-
but not every single one.
No,
there would
but you're
still
not
be
gonna.
some.
You're never gonna stop every single one. So you have to stop as many as
Well,
you can.
I mean,
So let's.
technically,
But hold on. Let me finish real quick. I know I've been talking a lot. I'm sorry. Let me take
Don't
obesity.
apologize. Finish up. I got a super chat. Then I want to hear Dami Lama. Go ahead.
Okay, let's take obesity. If you have somebody who's 600 pounds, pushing 7, right, and he's shoveling donuts down his gullet every day and sitting on his couch watching TV, doing nothing, you are not going to go to that guy and change him like a light switch. That's not going to happen. Even if you say, okay, we're banning donuts for a month, and in the meantime, we are going to, open up physical training and nutritional advice and give people $100 check. Most people who have hit that point probably will not take advantage of that. Let's be clear. They'll just find another outlet, right? What we're preventing is people who are already on that path. Let's take somebody who's like 250 pounds. They work 3 jobs. They get McDonald's every day, and they're just not in a good position physically. And then you say, okay, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to we're going to curb junk food for a month. This is just hypothetical. I'm not saying we should do this. We're going to curb junk food for a month, and we're going to say, during this month, we're going to incentivize people with $100 check or even more, go and get help, right? We're going to say, go and seek out a physical trainer, a nutritionist, a doctor, whatever, to prevent yourself from sliding further down that path, and then educate them on the dangers of sliding down that path. And then even though you have this group of people who have already hit 700 pounds, and as soon as the donuts are allowed back, they're going to go back to shoveling them down their throats. Now you have a new group of people who are educated,
We've
who have the
literally,
help they
like,
need,
this is the,
and you're going
all
to
right.
prevent more
Okay.
cases.
Yeah, we get the idea. So here's the thing. That check that they sent out wasn't to go ahead and keep people locked down. That was simply to stimulate the economy. All right. You need to stop making this conflation that the
Okay, but
government gave money to go for people to stay
I know that
locked
the government
down.
is not on our side, but it still
Yeah,
had
but
that
it's
effect.
like it's never happened. So you're proposing a solution that has no political will, that we cannot get support for.
This
So
is
like, I'm
stuff
sorry.
that
I think we do kind of need to
we
just
are medically
disregard it.
trained. We are medically trained to do these things. This is
Okay,
like
I
clinical
understand
science.
that, but like we're not going to throw money at a solution unless it benefits the
Okay,
economy.
speaking of money
right?
and throwing money,
Well,
it
okay,
benefit
but
me
we're-
$10 from Testicle Johnson to say easy solution, get everyone to sign a contract that makes them promise they won't kill anyone with guns, then
This
they won't
isn't-
commit murder because it would be a breach of contract, which is illegal. $5
Okay,
from
but-
𝕾𝖍𝖎𝖙 to say for Alec, what's his threshold for a legislative ban having quote unquote worked? Prohibition cut alcohol consumption by 50%. Wish we could cut gun violence by 50%. That's fair too. I guess I do want to get this back on topic just a little bit, because I think this is an important question, because we are going to face in the future similar situations where there is going to be, we have a climate crisis looming. At what point, legislation be damned, we just have to do it anyway, right? Regardless if we can get the votes or not. Like, we
won't-
just have to
won't.
just
So
get it.
It's only poor people that are going to die.
Well,
Who
I
cares?
want to hear from 𝕵𝖔𝖎. 'Cause
Oh,
he-
okay.
Yeah,
So,
he had his hand up, and then we'll get
now-
to Ferry, and then we'll get to Rezi. Go ahead.
we're getting rerailed, so I just want to address like a lot of the mass shooters that have happened, or have done things, have a history of mental health interventions. So that alone doesn't seem to be a solution to the problem, especially in situations like most recently the Jacksonville dollar store. That person was Baker acted. Which means they were involuntarily held and evaluated. Maybe that can be something in the long term that will effectively address the issue over a period of like a decade, maybe, if we also put energy and resources into that solution. But the nature of an emergency order is the emergency part, I guess. So we need some kind of actions being taken, just like if we gave free medical coverage in COVID, that wouldn't have necessarily stopped COVID from spreading. If we give free medical coverage and mental health coverage, which I think we should focus on that also, but there has to be some kind of way to figure out what our Second Amendment rights are, and what our Second Amendment limitations for what the limitations the Second Amendment
Yeah, to
places.
Has
to echo
Yes.
that again. Mental health is a solution for a lot of things, but it's not a solution for gun violence. I don't think providing free access to healthcare just is just not going to help. But Fairy Queen and then Rezi.
Okay.
So I have two things to say. One, the practical way to address gun violence. I don't know how effective this will be. Normally, when I hear people like suggesting how to address it, it's either in the realm of increased access to mental health care, increased access to healthcare, or reducing the amount of access to guns. But I think that there is a third thing that we can do that everyone would agree with, which is increased public education on how to identify who is likely to become a school shooter. So I work as a teacher, and one of the very first meetings that I had at the very last year in the spring was a list of things to look for in our students if it seemed as though a student was on the verge of frankly becoming either homicidal or suicidal. That's public information that I think a lot of people do not have and do not know. So, and this would be something, if more people were aware of how to identify whether or not somebody was likely to become dangerous, or what to look for, or how to identify that, that's another way that, another thing that we could do in order to address the issue of gun violence.
Were you
is to address
required,
things like-
just out of curiosity, since you probably have some more information than I do, as a teacher, are you required to report them to the police or other authorities if they are demonstrating these things?
I am a mandatory reporter, so
Okay,
I am
so yes.
required to report it to my yes. It's a yes, and that's a no, and a no that's a yes. So I'm required to report it to my supervisor. If I believe somebody is being abused, I'm required to report it to CPS. I'm also required to report it to the principal and to whoever my boss is at the same time. So yes, we are required to report it to the police.
I agree. Sorry.
Oh, the second thing is, somebody can bomb the super chat and to correct me, but it seems as though when we're talking specifically about a public health emergency, the types of constitutional rights that tend to be restricted fall under roughly 3 categories. So it's curfew and movement restrictions. So in some emergencies, authorities may impose curfews and restrict the movement of individuals. Quarantine and isolation orders, and the third one is surveillance and privacy. I recently, like when thinking about COVID, I scanned through this document from the Department of Justice, which talked about what law enforcement is able to do in response to a public state health emergency. Almost all of the information listed had to do with quarantining, curfews, enforced vaccinations, that sort of thing, right? It's that typical thing. Nowhere in that document could I find any mention of gun violence. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm not saying that there hasn't been a governor or a politician that has called gun violence a public health issue. What I'm saying is, at least from the research I've been able to see and the legislation that I was able to look up to research, I haven't actually seen it described as a public health emergency. It's per se. And that may seem like a silly distinction, like when we're discussing on how to address it. The reason why it matters is because police officers are granted those exceptions to the Constitution in the state of a public health emergency. So there you go. Those are the 2 things.
Resi.
So again, I think that we're trying to put out solutions that mean absolutely nothing, because the enforcement mechanism of those solutions keeps coming back to cops, which don't support these solutions, right?
Well,
like I think
mine
that's.
doesn't.
I disagree with that.
No,
One,
yeah, I think yours absolutely. I mean, yours doesn't work because again, there's no political will behind the economics of it. So
Can I ask
that's
you a question?
that's why yours doesn't work. But
Can
the
I ask
thing
you a
is,
question?
yeah,
Well,
go
let
ahead.
him go ahead.
No, go ahead,
Emily.
dude. Yeah.
Okay, so let's say that you have a guy, 4chan Andy, who is, Cheeto Dusty Beard, and he's
Mhm.
like, okay, I'm gonna go commit a school shooting,
Yeah.
and he's clearly not mentally well, right?
Uh-huh.
So what's your solution to this? Like, let's say that all of this is happening. He, he has. How do I want to put this? He has no access to a gun, right? He cannot get a gun, but he really wants to, and he would like to commit a mass shooting and then kill himself afterwards because he's just got nothing left to lose, right? So you take away the guns. Now what? What do we do with this guy?
Wait, what do you mean? So like there's no guns, he's not at threat of danger. What do I do with the guy?
But he's still mentally unwell. He is still in a state where he would like to commit mass homicide and then kill himself.
Are you asking me personally, or are you asking me?
I'm
what's
asking
possible?
with this specific guy, what do you do with him?
Me personally, or like what's publicly possible?
Uh,
Because personally, I would say, yeah,
Don't
give me free
violate
healthcare,
TOS,
right?
please. But
Okay,
okay.
yeah, okay. I'm not gonna say like I'm past the walls. Okay, we're
Okay.
fine. Yeah, I personally I'd say yeah, give him healthcare. What do
Okay,
I
but
say
why?
that we do? Literally nothing.
Why-
We got rid of the throwing them back into like sanitariums and shit back in the 80s with Reagan. We don't actually have something we can do, and they basically become homeless and they die in the streets.
Okay, but what I'm saying is that doesn't.
No, stop, because that's even if you take away all the guns, these people still have options to commit.
Yeah,
mass
we let them
murder.
die in the streets.
No,
that's
they'll
what we
get
are.
in
Well,
their
he would just
car
grab a knife
and they'll
from the
drive it
kitchen.
into a crowd. They'll grab
Okay.
a knife and they'll go start stabbing,
Mhm.
right? Like if someone really wants to do this, the guns are efficient way to do it, but it's not
The
their
guns,
only
the
option.
guns
right?
remove like several layers. Okay, like you have to think to make a bomb. You have to go ahead and have some physical equity to use a knife, right?
So-
Guns are like, it's like the whole statement of guns. Like God didn't make a sequel, Smith and Wesson did, right?
You said
wait,
give
wait,
him
wait,
free
wait.
health
So we
care.
could have,
I
like,
would say,
just
yeah.
like
I am in favor of like everybody going and getting healthcare, like
Right,
mental
so
health care especially. But
think
I
we're-
also don't believe that is something that is feasible whatsoever politically, right? And I like looking at real time solutions. that
But
we
we're
can
not talking about
act
what's
on.
politically
Well, no, you guys are
feasible.
talking about solutions that we just can't do.
But these are the solutions that are the most practical that would work. That's the
they're the
discussion
most
we're
practical,
having.
and they're still beyond practicality or feasibility. That's the issue.
But
Because literally the force of power that the state has, which is cops, are not going to do anything for them.
When-
Wait,
no,
I disagree with that
Okay.
totally. I like we can
Mhm.
look at like ATF agents and what they do. We've got federal agents. We've got a lot of
ATF
individuals
only
that
does
are
that
willing to
shit when
enforce.
somebody has
Wait,
like a
speaking
whole
of which, I
religion.
just want to clarify one thing. The governor also asked for federal agents to help enforce. So it's not
Yeah, I
just
mean-
the local
Yeah.
law enforcement that'll be dependent on to enforce this.
Yeah, I mean, when it comes down to it, I think that the local law enforcement, they like it comes down to they support the laws that they kind of agree with, or maybe even not laws they agree with, but laws that they accept. And I think the 30-day ban on open carry that a lot of people are saying is unconstitutional, they would definitely like not support that. But if something, another power that the governor have was to convene a special legislation for emergencies, like in emergencies, they can just draw the legislation into Congress or the legislation in the House and the Senate, and they can make them like kind of vote and move on this kind of emergency issue. If it had been done like that, I don't think the cops would have been as willing to not enforce it if it had been passed through like what they viewed as proper channels.
Also, we have a great
so, like,
precedent. set.
what fantasy world are we living in that it's all like these like lefty cops that like agree
Okay, let
with
me
these
stop you
sorts of
because this
things?
entire conversation
Okay.
we've been
Wait,
talking past
there's-
each other, and I'm tired of it. I'm
there's a-
trying to say this is what we ought to do. This is the optimal solution. And you keep telling me, you keep trying to hammer this idea in that it's not going to happen. It's never going to happen. So why even talk about it? Are you
It's
going to
not that
vote for a
it's-
politician? Hold on. Are you going to vote for a politician that says, yeah, these are the measures, the measures I said, basically? Or would you vote for a politician that says, well, those will never happen, so let's just let the guy die in the streets, like that status quo demands?
I would vote for the politicians that would be willing to go ahead and wrest their power back. All right, as a legislative like function from like cops and LEOs and cop unions.
I gave you two options.
Right.
Which one do you
Okay.
pick?
Well, you gave me two options. I'm choosing the one that I would actually like to do.
Okay,
and
but-
like what
but
I've been
in
trying
this-
to like
but in
hammer
this
in
scenario,
on is that
this is my
scenario.
Do you
argument
like
versus your
healthcare, or
argument.
do you like dead kids?
Dead
This is
kids,
my argument
100%.
versus
I
your
love
argument.
dead kids, man. I like the blood flowing in the street. All right, shout out Uvalde.
You just sound very hopeless this entire time. That's all I'm saying. You just sound
Yes,
like none of this will
yeah,
ever
because
happen.
it is like kind of a
therefore-
little hopeless if we're not going to address
no,
the
it's
power.
not.
We do not have power to do things.
Yeah, so we
all
need
right?
to go
the
get it.
bottom of this comes down to we need to refix how we do enforcement, and we need to start like actually tackling the actual issue here. Yes, we could do a lot of things if we didn't have corrupt police forces that have reduced our ability to believe in the state in the first place, which causes a lot of these people to go fucking crazy in the first place.
Wait,
right?
it's so like corrupt.
Okay,
$20
so then you-
from Temperate Takes. Let me make my money, gang.
Okay.
Capitalism based. There's never a will to do something until the worst case scenario. Women and children were starving before prohibition was finally enacted. We'll have security guards at every school before anything about gun control is done.
Mhm.
I do want
how many
to.
kids
I
need
do
to
want
get
to
turned
back
into
up.
hamburgers
I do want to back
before
up
we do something?
Gunter here, just a tad. Like, you act as if this isn't going to be enforced. If it was to be found constitutional, or if it wasn't stopped in court, there would be state police enforcing it. The only group who did not agree to enforce it were the local cops. The state police absolutely were on board with enforcing this. There are other groups, and if they needed to pull in federal troops, the ATF, the FBI, other enforcement mechanisms, those are possible. The National Guard could be called at the end of the day. And these people, I guarantee you, would enforce
Why do those
these
local
orders.
cops still have jobs?
Yeah. Also, we have a framework for situations like this, thanks to Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. He's multiple times replaced district attorneys and other dissenting law enforcement leaders in order to pursue his stated solutions.
Sorry, I don't have names. So, what's the tattoo guy? What's your
Rez,
sorry? What's your
just call me whatever you want. Direct your voice, I'll get it. It's okay.
okay? Just
Call
I
me
do want to
hopeless.
steal.
I like that one.
Sure, I want to steel man you real quick. So you're saying that it basically comes down, it sounds like, to your solution is police reform, right? First and
Yeah.
foremost, like that's what
I
we
think
need to
that's
start
like
with. Because
my
I agree,
go
like that's important. I completely agree with that. Like police overstepping is a huge problem that affects gun violence, and I don't think we've even touched on that yet. And I'm guilty of that as well. So I think if to be frank, if you had approached with that statement, then I would have probably resonated with it more.
Yeah,
that makes
I'll
sense.
ask you a question.
Sure.
Do you think that the cop that's out there and watch those kids
wait.
get
Is
turned
your
into
guys'
hamburger and
is your both
Uvalde
of your
should be
point?
executed?
Is your both of your point that the police, if they were just nicer to us, we'd have less mass shootings?
Yes.
No, I'm saying that like
Well,
when
partly.
cops go ahead and defy legal orders, all right, and defy their jobs, they not only should lose their jobs, they should be tried in a court, and they should face punishments for going ahead and you basically wasting government resources.
Let me rephrase.
I think that the Uvalde cops should be put on trial for murder.
Let me rephrase that. I don't think what you stated is 100% accurate. What is accurate is if police officers were less trigger happy, then we would see less police violence, and that would lead to fewer people. How do I want to put this? We've seen that reducing police violence reduces the rate of crime and reduces the rate of poverty. So I do think that addressing police violence is an important part of this conversation. Certainly not the whole thing by any stretch, but I do think that that's important to address.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
I have a question to Rezi. So
Mhm.
I don't disagree with you, but in that vein of thinking, so do you think that if a governor writes an illegal order, an order that is unconstitutional, should she be fired? Should she also lose her job?
Yeah. Well, no, because they're elected, right? Most cops aren't elected. I think sheriffs, you get it's like a weird situation there, but like elected officials, they need to be removed through impeachment. But cops are literally working a job as they are hired as a voucher of the state.
What's funny, guys, is I feel like I
be honest, I
disagree,
think
or I do agree.
Yeah.
With
I think the main
Rezi,
thing
but
that we actually need to focus on
I'm
is
so
like,
sorry.
ultimately is economic shit, right? Because that's like what's really causing the mental health crises is the fact that there are not opportunities that are happening for a lot of fucking people, that they get to the point where you literally are tunnel visioned. You have one thing you can do, and that's make your fucking mark on the world somehow. Everyone wants to feel fucking important. And guess what? Hate to say it, there's a reason why after one shooting you have more pop up, because we plaster their faces everywhere. We have conversations like this. We're feeding into it. All right, like I could start, like we started like naming them off. Like, yeah, guess what? We're good to go. We could make a mass shooter just from this panel. I bet.
I have thoughts, but I want to hear everyone. Okay, no, fuck it. Go ahead, Fairy Queen, and then I'm gonna just jump in because this is all wrong.
I do have another question. Does anybody here have an open or concealed carry permit? Does anybody here actually own guns? I don't have.
I own a gun. I don't have an open or concealed.
Yeah.
You're breaking my HIPAA rights, but yes, I do own a gun.
Folks in the middle, Walter and 𝕵𝖎𝖙, do you guys own guns?
No guns.
No guns.
Okay, but Rezi, do you have a concealed permit? Is that what you said?
No, I don't have a concealed permit.
Love my murder dildo.
yeah.
Let's go.
Okay, the reason I ask is because part of what also seems egregious about this order is that it includes people that had to specifically get a permit to have a concealed, like there's already a hoop that you have to jump through in order to do this action. You can't just own a gun and then randomly walk out into Publix with it, right? So the reason I ask is because I'm genuinely curious and I don't know, what do you have to do in order to get a concealed or an open carry permit? Like, do you
Okay,
have
so,
to have a
so
background
in
check?
Pennsylvania, to get a CCW, all you need to do is get like one person to sign off that you're not crazy, and then we are an at-will issue state. At that point, you get a concealed permit. You can just have concealed carry. To open carry, you just have to have a gun on your back. That's it. You don't even need to have that person that signs off on you do anything other than not have a felony, right? So yeah, that's Pennsylvania. That's the law for concealed carry, and I think that's becoming the standard around the nation.
Does anybody know if that's the standard in Albuquerque? Is that true as well in Albuquerque? Is it that easy to get a
When I
permit?
looked it
I
up
have
in
no clue.
Albuquerque, it shows that I think when I looked it up, there's no permit required to get a handgun at the very least in Albuquerque. And for concealed carry, for permits, it seemed very easy because I know in my state, it's literally just like a fee that you pay and then they issue it almost
Yeah,
immediately.
it's going to vary state to state, locality to locality. It's really hard to answer this question because
Well,
It's generally issued at will. That's like at best there isn't some national database about it. There isn't like some, again, great movement to make it not something that gets issued to you as long as you get somebody to sign off on it. And that's, I think, the general gist. Before, I mean, I know the at will thing, I think that was 2019 that we enacted that here. But like, yeah, I think that's about it. I mean, a lot of places just don't even have that.
I think
You don't
I
even need a
take
concealed carry person in a
I
lot
want
of
to
places.
address a few things that I think are incorrect. This idea that the prohibition work is fallacious.
Okay.
It did not remove, right, all consumption of alcohol, and obviously there were a lot of people, there are a lot of side effects that were negative about it. I'm not a prohibition guy by any means, but to act as if there wasn't a real problem at the time that it didn't, at least in part, solve is just ahistorical. The reason that a lot of women, especially, pushed for the prohibition in the first place is because their husbands would come home drunk and beat the shit out of them. And so they wanted that to stop. And for the most part, it did. It reduced consumption of alcohol, as the super chatter mentioned and alluded to, by half. And so, again, a ban won't solve the entire issue. I don't think anyone here believes a ban would solve the entire issue. But hey, if I could have half less kids dead, it gets mighty tempting that I'm like, okay, maybe we could do there. Oh, and someone has just paid me money to bring Average Debate Enjoyer on, and I'll bring him and add him into the mix. Thank you for the $20. Hey, would you blow me? I get the joke. Okay. But yes.
If I could respond to that.
Please respond.
Okay. Oh shoot, the layout just changed.
Yeah, in camera, if you got it, by the way. So yeah.
Smoke if you got them. But okay. To be clear, I have not done a ton of research on the prohibition statistics, so I'm going to take your word for it that did happen. My thing is, if you're going to do a temporary ban on something, I don't think any of us want alcohol to be banned permanently, no matter how many alcoholics there are. I just don't think that's a good solution, and that deprives people of the freedom to drink alcohol, which I love very much. So I do have a little bit of a selfish stake. But anyway, if you do it permanently, that's not, I feel like that's taking away freedom from people for the sake of, and not solving the root issue, right? So if you were to do a temporary ban on alcohol, and in the meantime, you solve the issues of this husband who's coming home from work, getting aggressive and drinking, then I think that's an effective ban. If instead you say, we're going to ban alcohol for a month, all the guy's got to do is stick it out for a month. And then he can just go right back to drinking and beating his wife. So, a temporary ban is fine as long as it's accompanied by other things. Like,
I think that's a good point, actually. Like this,
public. That's like the whole crux of the issue. We're not even banning guns. All right, people are
Yes.
just gonna they're gonna lie and say, "Oh, I don't have a gun on me," or they're just not gonna have it open for like a month and then go back to it.
Well, like I said, I don't even fully agree with this policy to begin with. So
Okay, so one of the things though that you might kind of look at is that maybe it's like a thing about like the culture, the drinking culture of Prohibition was that people would get drunk and beat their wives, and so then they did Prohibition and like culture kind of changed. So when we do reintroduce alcohol, because like I don't know if like a lot changed, is it really just because they were like all super poor back then? I think it was just guys like getting drunk and they didn't realize that it was that big of a deal to kind of beat their wives. Prohibition comes along, culture kind of changes. So let's say we have a lot of like shootings at schools, a lot of mass shootings, a lot of gun death. You ban it for a while and it introduces some kind of like change to the culture, so then you can like reintroduce guns and it's like back to normal. I just I don't think this whole thing that banning would do nothing means anything at all. I think banning would obviously, like if we're being honest, like a full like Australian ban on guns in North America, in the United States, would definitely prevent a lot of the deaths. I don't know why we're like stepping around it. I though personally, I'm not sure if I don't know how many deaths it would take. I think it would, because I just like to round it all up. I don't think it would ever be possible. But honestly, like if they wanted to do it tomorrow to stop like all the gun deaths that have happened, I don't really care about guns. Guns are my favorite thing in the world. They could probably go for it, but the main thing why they're still around is because no one feels that passionate about it. People like guns. People like having guns. It's an unpopular issue to like talk about taking people's guns. If more people supported gun control, we'd have gun control. People just don't really care that much about the topic right now.
Ron DeSantis declares trans freedom of expression as a public health threat and suspends the First Amendment for 30 days. You cool with that? We can just
No, because-
unsuspend the First Amendment when, that stuff clears up, right?
that's not comparable, because being trans
It
is
is.
just a state of no, it's not. It's a gun is not.
Yeah,
No, it's.
you
Let
can-
me explain
you
why
can-
it's
you
not.
can
before
put your gun
keep
down. You
rattling.
can put your gun down. You can put your gun down. You can't put your
cannot
gender
put your
down. Dude,
trans
chill.
down. Right. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Yeah,
I
you
don't
can put the
believe,
gun
I
down.
don't
You can't
believe
put
in
the
gender
gender down.
theory, so
Just-
You
it
can
is.
put the
you
gun
are wrong.
down, just like you can't take your retard brain and put it down on the fucking table to make.
I don't believe in gender theory, so it is. So,
okay. So basically,
hold
you're
on,
just
hold on.
spouting off. All right,
You guys
Sam.
are talking
It's okay.
about alcohol.
It's okay, guy.
You're
like
talking
it's fine.
about alcohol. Alcohol. There's no amendment protecting you to drink alcohol. There's a Second Amendment protecting your gun rights. So we're banning the Second Amendment. We're suspending the Bill of Rights, not just your consumption of things.
Technically, no. The Second
We're not even
Amendment
doing
gives
that.
us the right to bear
you don't-
arms, not
if
to
you don't
carry
even
them
believe that
everywhere
trans-
that we want to.
If you don't even believe that trans people exist, I'm not talking to you because you're insane. So let's just let other people.
What a child.
But
Come
I'm
on,
going
at
to
least
keep
talk
my
about it.
discussion
Oh,
with
dude.
other people.
Just yeah,
So,
I mean, here's
so you can't
Well, no,
address
I
the
mean,
point.
like that's the thing.
So
I
you
believe,
keep it
like
up
he
top.
actually
can't
proves
address
to me
the
that
point.
trans,
let's-
that trans people exist because he's a fucking bitch.
Stop.
Fuck that.
Everyone
Look
stop
at this
talking.
Sam Hyde wannabe.
Everyone stop
Fuck you,
talking.
dude.
We're going to bring it back to the topic of the New Mexico governor's ban order.
On
We can
concealed carry and open carry. All right,
Yes.
let's be clear. There isn't a constitutional protection for concealed and open carry. all
Yes,
right?
the Second
And
Amendment.
we already moved on from
There is.
constitutional arguments in like the first 10 minutes of this. But of course, you're coming in here hot. I understand. All right, you had to watch a little bit of
listening the
$1
whole
million
time.
stream to get yourself
Well,
ready and make sure that you're continuing to use your laptop mic
Bro,
rather
why
than
is your
your
butt so hurt? Relax.
A
Yo, it's
transaction
okay.
was made. So here he is. Okay. But Mr. Walter, you have your hand up so politely, so I'm going to go to you.
Of course. I got to respect you, Wick, offering your platform to us tonight. Truly appreciate it. But so
You
one of the
don't
big
need to
things that I
suck my dick. Just go.
all right, no, I'm glazing. Just let me glaze in peace, bro. But so here's the thing. I think that this fine gentleman who just joined, I think he does offer a unique perspective on this whole aspect of emergency powers and creating normalization for emergency powers. When we live in a democracy, we have people who are going to disagree on with us with stuff. We could say that it's not based in fact at all. But with these guys, if they genuinely believe that this is a public health emergency and are using these emergency powers for these types of things, I think it's an interesting conversation to say if you guys want to use it for guns, which it seems like it would probably work in preventing gun deaths. I think we do have to kind of contend with the fact that the people we don't like can get into power and can try and ban equivalent rights and equivalent systems. And I think we might need to I think that'd be an interesting conversation to go
Well,
at instead of just screaming.
I mean,
Okay,
with all due respect, like we have been having that conversation. It's why I brought up 9/11. It's why I brought up the Japanese internment camps. It's why there are many examples of where this specific kind of issue can be used in ways that we deliberately dislike. And we've asked if you need an example of an actual court case. This literally happened in 2020. The Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn v. Cuomo. The Supreme Court considered restrictions on religious gatherings during the COVID-19 pandemic. And even during then, the court ruled that these restrictions infringed upon religious freedom. And just as the average debater enjoyer stated before, that's something that is explicitly stated in the Constitution as a constitutional right that you have, right? And that's not an unimportant thing to point out.
you need to demonstrate
Also-
harm before you ban something.
We already moved on
DC
from
versus
constitutional
Heller
stuff in the first
decision.
10 minutes.
In the DC versus Heller decision of 2008, the Supreme Court held that the Second Amendment protects an individual's right to possess a firearm for self-defense within their home. And Justice Scalia, writing for the majority, made it clear that that right is not unlimited. He said there's longstanding prohibitions and regulations on firearms, and they're consistent with the Second Amendment. So, like, not every limitation that we would put on where we bring guns is necessarily an attack on the Second Amendment.
Okay, that's a fair point. But can you tell me what those restrictions historically have been regarding what restrictions we've had regarding the Second Amendment, right? I just asked a question about concealed and open carry, and it sounds as though, based off of what I heard, that you can have an open carry permit at will, right? It doesn't sound like you have
For
to have
many
an
states.
background check. Right, for many states. And I haven't heard any example given so far of a state where that isn't the case, right?
Well,
So
New
what
York.
exist, right? Like, I mean, I hear the same line of reasoning regarding a freedom of speech, and people will say, well, you can't just say anything you want, right? Well, okay, there are restrictions. Which one of these restrictions does the example you're talking fall underneath? Is it obscenity? Is it defamation? Is it libel? Is it blackmail? And so I'm asking you the same question, like, what restrictions exist, and does this fall underneath one of those restrictions? That's what you have to demonstrate if you're going to claim.
Okay. So, like I said earlier, there's restrictions in many cities. For example, in DeSoto, Missouri, there's an ordinance that dates back from 1888, and it limits the ability to bring any kind of weapon, and firearms are included in that, into churches, schools, or even social gatherings. You can't bring them by anywhere near an election precinct, courtrooms, or public assemblies, and that includes protests. The only exception to those is since it's written in 1888 and it's pertinent to the Second Amendment, it leaves an exception for militia drills and meetings.
Private businesses as well. Private businesses can say they don't want guns on their grounds as well. So,
well, yes, that's more of a right to your own property, though.
True, but that's just an exception.
I just want to reiterate, I don't think like the constitutionality of it is that interesting of a conversation. I think we ought to talk about what ought to be and how to solve these issues.
I think the constitutionality of it is very interesting, and that's why we have a preliminary injunction placed on making sure they preserve the status quo of not enacting this order. That's going to go to the merits October 8th, I think. This case goes to the merits, and it's super important to see where that goes.
Okay, fair enough.
How to solve these issues is pretty much already written in stone. We already know how to do it. The vast majority of gun violence is not some crazy person going into a school and doing a mass shooting. These active shooter events are less than 1% of gun homicides. Most gun homicides are gang related. And the way to tackle that is what we did in the Biden crime bill from the early 90s, where we did tough policing in neighborhoods to cut down our violent crime rate by 80%. So we know how to solve it.
I would like to combat that by saying when the police union, I believe it was in New York. I may have the details wrong on this, but the police union in New York, I believe, went on strike and gun violence went down. Is that correct? I'm pretty sure that is.
Yeah, that did happen.
I have to look into that.
Yeah, the crime went down. So like with fewer police, there was less crime. So I don't know how you square that circle.
Also, how do you explain
guys, we should just get rid of all police departments. Problem solved. No more crime.
No, actually, I do think serious police reform is necessary. That's all that demonstrated.
There's also a correlation with right to carry states. And when they in the states that instituted right to carry, they've seen an 11% to 30% rise in gun violence.
Instated what now?
11 to 30%. That's not insignificant, gang.
What are we talking? I missed that statement.
Yeah, I
So,
did too.
It is
according
insignificant
to
for
according
freedom,
to the Dalai Lama, I don't know if his statistics are accurate, but according to the Dalai Lama, in states where they have instituted open carry laws, the gun violence has risen by 11 to 30%.
I'm looking at it right now. I got a PolitiFact pulled up because he mentioned that earlier. I'm looking right now at the 8 states that have open carry. The year that it was proposed by Matt Gaetz, this is a PolitiFact kind of saying he was half right, half wrong. Those 8 states had a lower violent crime rate than the 42 states that don't have open carry.
During what
It was only 1
range?
year.
Yes,
it was only
Just the year they, and then after that to like just go back to normal or go up or what?
I don't
It
know.
goes
That's
down.
not in the-
It
it's
goes
not in
down
the
after
article.
that. You can zoom in on a certain amount of time, and depending on how much you zoom in, you could find some convenient information. But I'm pretty sure this, where I have it somewhere, but it seems like it was a drawn out from 2019 to 2021, and 2019 was when a lot of these states ended up enacting this. So if you want to zoom in to like the year of, yeah, that's going to be convenient, but it's important to get as much information as we possibly can and then look at it through a wider lens.
What I'm saying is that when you aggregate the data, both concealed carry and open carry don't raise or lower the homicide rate very much at all. Sometimes you see other violent
You
crimes.
just made the argument that it lowered it, dude. Like you're just like you're not even debating.
I'm saying
you're literally saying that it lowers it when they announce it. Now you're just saying, what is your claim? What are you actually saying?
He gave one anecdotal statistic. I gave one anecdotal statistic.
I want to hear from Alec real quick. You had a question? Get us back.
Yeah, it was not a question. I was just going to address average debate enjoyer. First of all, you're supposed to speak into the front of the Yeti mic. And second of all, please get Logitech, I believe it's 𝕍𝖎, and mess with the settings. Your mic quality will be much better. All right, that's all.
You're currently using your laptop mic. Tap your desk.
I don't have a laptop.
Or whatever, your computer, webcam, whatever.
Okay, regardless.
Does that change it?
Mm-mm.
Okay,
So
then it's
is anyone
definitely
here? Is anyone here? And this is a genuine question. I don't know. Was anyone here okay with what happened in the immediate aftermath of 9/11, with increased surveillance of certain groups that were considered to be more likely to be terrorists?
By
Is there
today's
anyone
standard
that
or
would
back
be
then
okay
standard?
with that?
Yeah. Sure.
No, and I'm not okay with it. No.
I'm not today, but I felt okay with it in the moment.
I think you'd be hard pressed to find somebody in the moment that wasn't okay with it. Like, and that's just kind of
it was a popular. Yeah, it was very.
We were all fed like a lot of lies about that shit. We invaded everybody but Saudi Arabia, and they're the ones that did it. So,
I mean, Thomas Sowell calls this type B discrimination. You can make some argument. I mean, I'm on the fence. There's certain things. Yeah, like
stop listening when you said Thomas Sowell, but go on.
I don't care. I didn't ask you. Yeah, so it's called type B discrimination, and there's certain arguments you can make in favor of it. Absolutely. Like in New York, you can say 92% of the time it's going to be a young man between 15 and 26, non-white, that's carrying an illegal gun, and that's why stop and frisk targeted specific demographics and worked. So yes, racial profiling to a degree is okay, but then if you go too far, it's bad. Absolutely.
no, racial profiling just goes ahead and keeps the entire system together and creates a punitive state rather than a restorative state in the first place, because we don't have a restorative policing system.
You're right.
To begin with.
You're
so
100%
like stop and
right.
frisk is still fucked because it doesn't have the things that allow it to actually become unfucked.
That's not the goal of the system, so it's working perfectly. Actually, that would be
the goal. The goal of the system is to hold black people down. Yeah, that you are right.
Okay. I think the goal. Well, I think the goal of the system is to maintain the status quo, but part of that is typically holding black people down. So
poor people, more generally poor people, even poor
people, yeah, for sure. But
to be fair,
yeah.
Okay.
We just need like more political willpower behind certain things to be able to get the stuff moving. Like, I mean, it's all like status quo, things entrenched in certain ways. I mean, the thing happened in 9/11, things afterwards are all just because we all wanted it to happen. It's I don't know, it's not like this malevolent thing that's trying to keep people down the system. It's like we don't have the political willpower to change the entire criminal justice system right now, but we probably have the political willpower to like maybe do a little gun reform, maybe do a little stop
I
and
think we
frisk.
got
Maybe
way more political willpower to reform the criminal justice system. Republicans hate the criminal justice system right now. I think we are on the precipice of being able to like literally destroy the CIA. If I'm going to be completely frank with you, I think there's way more willpower to reform the policing systems and like the rehabilitation systems.
Political
Well,
willpower got us to the status quo that we're at right now, and that's why there's no political willpower to change it, because the majority of the United States likes what they have. Most people of all racial demographics want equal or more police funding.
Well,
So-
I think that's a wild thing to say. I think both sides of the political spectrum are dissatisfied.
If you
with
look
the
at the
current
younger
status quo,
population,
just in different directions.
the younger population wants way less police funding because they're more politically active. So and in general, I don't really care what the majority of people want in this case anyway. It's a matter of what will actually work. And police reform is absolutely critical.
So
Police reform.
other than just real quick, because I want to interrogate this, we're talking about what actually works, and I'm curious what everyone thinks will actually work. Rezi, you've been kind of doomer on this, so I'm wondering if you have any actual kind of things that you think we can do. But when you say I want to do things that actually work, other than healthcare, which we've already kind of gone on about, what do you think actually works in this situation? New Mexico has a problem. People are dying.
Yeah.
What do they do?
I have a solution. It's called Infrastructure Week. So basically, everybody loves the idea of Infrastructure Week, and basically what FDR did during the New Deal, which was take the federal government to create jobs, which went ahead, stimulated economy, increased wages overall. I think that a lot of the doom that is coming are people that are entrenched within debt from school, healthcare, etc., and having a way for them to get jobs that actually work will improve their mental health care dramatically across the fucking board. I don't think there are a lot of people that are going to disagree on infrastructure. It is generally a win-win for everyone involved. It's going to put Americans in jobs. It's going to put more money in the economy. I think that this is what we need to do. We need to have a culture that doesn't just go ahead and say, you will slave away until you die. Rather, we need to actually fix our job markets. And like, for instance, like people like that Australian property developer, I think everybody hated that dude. He came out and said that we need to get increase employment by 40 to 50%. We should, or unemployment by 40 to 50%, right?
That guy. Yeah, I know who you're talking about. Yeah.
I think we all like hate that dude. I don't think you're gonna find anybody on the left or the right that likes that guy. I think that again, like getting people the ability to have economic opportunities or just opportunities generally that go ahead and benefit them is good. We can go ahead and look at the reason why we sent out checks was to stimulate the economy. Crime went down dramatically. Poverty went down dramatically. That's how we make it happen, is get people out of poverty. I advocate for a revisioning of FDR's New Deal, especially as applying to our infrastructure, our crumbling bridge, roads, and buildings that we have in this country.
And you think that will solve gun violence in America? Fair enough.
I think that it'll have a dramatic effect on the issues that we are going ahead and talking that are downstream of gun violence, but while going ahead and Trojan horsing this whole idea in there to make it so that people are less isolated, less broken, and more able to go ahead and believe in a system that they then are working towards.
Fairy Queen, you're against this ban. What would you do? What do you think is the solution?
I think I've alluded to it before. Primarily, number one, I think that we should pass more reasonable and sensible gun legislation, more background checks. I think that it should be more difficult to receive an open or concealed carry permit. I think there are other things that we can do regarding that can make it more difficult to obtain a gun without having a complete blanket ban. I agree with Alec Gunter that increased access to mental health care and increased access to health services is important. It's not going to resolve everything. It's not going to be the fairy dust that makes it go away, but it's still something important to encourage. But the third thing that I also said, which I do think should be emphasized way, way more people need to know how to identify whether or not someone dangerous is in their school or is in their building.
Which one of us on this panel is most likely to be a mess?
I don't know. But
Average
that's
debate enjoyer. Average debate
Come on,
enjoyer.
make a guess.
1000%.
Okay, there's two of us
Okay.
that it's possible. Let's be real. All right,
Well,
come
I'm
on.
gonna go with you,
I clocked
Resi,
him the
Yes,
considering
second
the
he
thank
same
you.
came
That's
in.
what I
top
wanted.
metal
Let's go,
tonight,
baby.
okay? All right,
Okay.
there you go.
Fairy
Okay.
Queen
Thank
says
you.
Fairy
Thank
Queen
you.
says Resi. Alec Gunter
Yep.
says average debate enjoyer. Any other guesses? Any other guesses, gang? Who we got our money on?
I think
would-
Dami Lami or Dami
Oh,
Lama.
damn.
I throw
think
it
it's
back at
that,
discount Vosh
No,
over
he's
here.
more of like a weather underground bomb the school sort of person, dude. That's
No,
like
yeah,
that's
I
how I
think
see
the-
that's how I see mommy.
He's gonna
Yeah.
release a whole manifesto talking about like the divine energies that will all like plane meld into during the explosion.
Oh,
Like,
dude, is he going full?
He's in my
Hyperborean?
head.
Oh
It's
yeah, yeah.
full
Listen, this is fun
Hyperboreanism. Let's go.
this is fun to meme at and this is fun to laugh at, but I'm not kidding, right? There are many cases of when you're a teacher, when you're working with students, and you see some clearly and obviously disturbing behavior, and people do not do anything about it. And not only, and I don't even just mean like you will immediately pick up and call the police. I mean there are teachers who will see disturbing things happen in their classrooms, and they won't even pick up the phone and call the parents, right? Nobody is told. It's swept under the rug. Nothing is done. There are many cases of services that we could provide students, services that we could provide in our schools, in our communities, people who we know need access to mental health care, who we deliberately ignore. If more people were aware of, to identify the signs that somebody might be on the brink of a mental health crisis, they might be more willing to call somebody to do something about it. And the fact that most people don't do that speaks to the fact that most people do not know the signs. And I
Well,
think that's
you-
something that everyone could agree to. I think that's an apolitical solution, and
wait.
I think it's something that could genuinely resolve many of these cases.
But wait, Fairy Queen, you just said that a lot of teachers who have, I assume, received the same training that you did, still, even after receiving that training, don't report these things, don't do anything about it, right? So how do we square that circle, if you will? That even
Part of
when
the-
people are receiving this training, most people just are ignoring it. Why do you think that is?
In part because it's a big deal to get the state involved into somebody else's life. So a lot of people, I think, are unwilling to pick up the phone. They're unwilling to call CPS. They're unwilling to make the report because they're worried that, oh, well, maybe this kid could be a mass shooter in the wings, but it's also possible that this kid is just going through a phase and he's just being weird. And do I really want to involve the cops to get into this kid's life when really he's just, doing his thing in the back of the room, right? So the fact that it's an immediate call to the authorities, the fact that there is that fear means that you're less willing to pick up the phone and to call because you're worried about what the consequences are, which means that there needs to be a series of levels before it immediately goes to somebody in the authority. I mean, I hate to say it, but it's one of the reasons why people won't even pick up the phone and call the parents like when they're seeing something, because they're worried that the parents will react negatively to something that's happening in class, right? So that's what I think. I think that there needs to be more lower stakes submissions. Me submitting a file and emailing it to my principal should not immediately result in a huge overreaction. There needs to be and I think that more people would be encouraged to submit documentation of what they're seeing if they knew that it wasn't just, oh, I'm going to send this email and then this kid's life could be ruined, right?
I, for one, do agree that if we see our neighbors behaving in suspicious manners, that we should file a dossier and put it up into the government's hands. I think that's a great thing. Nothing will go wrong. There will be no unintended consequences for that. It's gonna be great. But I want to hear some other people's solutions.
Well,
Real
to be
quick.
clear, I'm speaking in the context of a school as a teacher.
Yeah, I mean,
in the
yeah,
public
you're just trying to get kids bullied for being weird. That's fine.
I'm
I
gonna
would
report my schoolmates. Yeah.
I would like
yeah,
to
yeah, that's just like that's it. You're gonna get kids that get pulled out of schools for any amount of time. They are going to become social outcasts, and you're going to literally make school shooters out of them if they weren't beforehand.
it is very clear you guys have no idea how this works. But like my
None of us
fiance is
do.
also a teacher. Well, I'm gonna piggyback. I'm so sorry. WhickTV number 2 is your name in the server.
And it's Fairy. Sorry, it's a meme in the server.
Okay, sure. Fairy, you said.
Yes.
Okay, so I first of all, I agree with pretty much everything that she said that I remember. I also want to say my fiance is a teacher, and that system of, and as a nurse also, that system of reporting is necessary. You have to, like, if somebody's showing those signs that you're trained to pick out and you don't report them, and then something happens, you're not doing your job.
But why do you think people, in your opinion, or your wife or your fiance's opinion, perhaps, if you've talked to her about this, why don't people do that?
Well, I think that's largely what Ferry said, but then there's another aspect of it, because if you think about the workload that teachers already have, all they're trying to do is go to work, get a paycheck, and come home for the most part. Obviously, you don't become a teacher just to get a paycheck. That's stupid because teachers don't get paid enough. But like, if you have a teacher who's already trying to deal with grading homework, with problem children like all over the classroom, just trying to get their attention, with a low paycheck, they don't have enough school supplies, all these problems stacking up. Now you're going to throw onto that giant pile a heap of paperwork and litigation and all of this stuff that you have to go through in order to properly report this behavior that you're noticing. So it's a lot of work, and it's going to sound like I'm saying they're being lazy, but what can you expect? I mean, my fiance comes home at the end of the week exhausted. Like, these kids wear her out. She's got so many kids that she takes care of. I don't think people realize when they're not teachers how hard it is to deal with a classroom of even just like 10 kids, let alone like
Does she
20
have
and
enough
30.
energy to do your laundry and make your sandwiches and things after
Why don't
that?
we
That's
just
crazy.
give her a gun
Why are you
so
asking
she
me
can
that?
threaten the
But
kids
I'm
with
saying
it if
it's
they act out?
Okay.
True.
But-
I agree with him.
I'm
Yeah,
trying to address
give
a
them
serious
power.
point here, though.
Please, go ahead.
I sorry. What were you saying? I didn't hear that.
No, the floor is yours. I'm sorry, I made a joke.
No. It's fine. It's fine. But I guess I lost my train of thought. That's all I'm trying to say is that would be a reason why they don't report.
Dami Lama, what do you think?
I think I agree with the idea. I would summarize that as like lowering the stigma of getting attention on the people that are a potential risk. I think a lot of things. I have a history of mental health issues, so I know what it's like. I have a history of mental health issues in the state of Florida too, which has the Baker Act. So like I know what it's like to not feel comfortable saying what you're going through to like even a medical professional, out of concern of like being placed or held without your held against your will. So there's a lot of like little processes like that when it comes to the mental health aspect of it that I would like to see become smoother. Also, I think we need to see more laws. I mean, more actions like Grisham's order, and not only more actions that are less intrusive or less of a against, like, less unconstitutional, but we need to see more actions that are more unconstitutional, because we seem to lack a consensus or understanding of where the guardrails our Constitution has laid out for what is our right and what is not our right. It seems that a lot of states have their own framework for it, but we also have a blanket constitution that seems to be understood in a different way by each individual. And I think every time one of those unconstitutional orders or laws gets passed, it's going to get tried and tested, and then we're going to get a better insight into what our abilities and what our limitations are within the constitutional framework.
So the problem that I want to go back to something you initially said, right? I
Yes.
want to gloss over the constitutionality thing for now, so that is something we will get to. But this idea, right, that we want to take away the stigma of the people who are being reported as potential mass shooters. I don't know. I don't see a route where that is possible, where you get reported for being a potential threat and then everyone's just okay with it. We can see what happens on a smaller scale when someone gets a reputation for being a sex pest or something like that. There's no actual evidence. They haven't actually done anything, but they're seen as being weird with women or weird with men or the opposite sex, whatever, right? No one, like, they are almost immediately ostracized by almost everyone around them. It does not go well for them. I'm trying to think, and maybe it's just a failure of imagination, and so maybe you can answer and address my concerns very easily. It's possible, but I'm trying to think of a way that we can take away the stigma of, oh yeah, the teacher, Bobby, Bobby over there, the teacher thought he might have been a mass shooter, so she reported him and stuff like that. But no, Bobby's cool. It's okay.
So there's
I
there's a
remember
lot
that
of
kid in high school. We bullied the shit out of him after that.
there's
Yeah.
a lot of
Briefly, and then I want to hear from other people too. So, but yeah.
All right, so like real quickly, my suggestion would be to focus on the kind of like the symptoms instead of the label of potential mass shooter. There are a lot of shared qualities that these shooters have, and a lot of individual, not shared qualities. But if we focus on things that are shared in these situations, mental health wise, and more likely to signal that they are a potential mass shooter, maybe not calling the state and saying, hey, this is a potential mass shooter, but maybe prioritizing those variables in in something that would make a kid or a person more likely to be a mass shooter, targeting those and getting the attention on those instead of the label. Because even if they weren't going to be a mass shooter, getting assistance on those variables, those symptoms,
Okay.
would be beneficial
Got you.
to our society as a whole.
What do the rest of you think?
This is about reducing the stigma of mental health in general. If you can accomplish that first, then you can say, okay, somebody with violent inclinations like that, then you can start saying, you can start making kids understand, or even adults understand, just because a person has violent inclinations as a result of a mental health complication, that doesn't technically, that doesn't automatically make them a bad person. If you're having mental health crises.
Wait, just real quick, Alec.
Mhm.
If you knew that your neighbor had violent tendency, you would probably behave differently around them, and rightly so, correct?
Well, if they are actively having violent tendencies, yes. And I don't think that a child who has active violent tendencies should even be in the classroom. Like if they're literally at risk for it.
No,
They should be.
They don't even have to have been violent around you, but if you knew that they had these red flags, we call them red flags, right? These warning signs that, yo, I don't know if I want to be around this guy because this guy seems like he's on a hair trigger. He may not have done any violence around you, but there are people like Rezi. I know if I'm around him, he's on a hair trigger. He could snap at any moment. Any moment, he could go from 0 to 100, and we're all gone.
Yeah.
It's
I
done.
think you're
It's
being
over, right.
I think this is a little uncharitable to what I'm trying to say.
Is it?
I'm not trying to say you should expose yourself to people who have violent tendencies. I'm saying if you see somebody with signs of violent tendencies, there should be a step A to Z of how you go about getting that person help, reducing the violent tendencies, and then, putting them back out into the open, right? So that, once the violent tendencies are solved and they're safe to be around, we have an understanding that this person's problems are, their problems of violence are not a problem anymore. They're not prone to that.
I don't know why we're acting like there's no way that they're going to be stigmatized as fuck if they do anything like this. I mean, there's going to be like the
Correct,
kid
and
that we don't like in class who we like egg on until he gets like taken off to like the padded room, and then we all make fun of him.
Yes, but that's where education comes in, right? For young kids, you need to teach them that mental health is important. And if somebody's having a mental health crisis or is showing certain signs of like, maybe they sit by themselves at lunch, maybe they, that's just one of many.
That's how we knew who to pick on.
Yeah, but what you teach, these hateful behaviors are not ingrained in these kids. They're taught. They're taught that differences are bad. So if you instead teach these kids that, these differences, if you teach these kids that these signs don't make somebody a bad person or make them open to being made fun of, and instead teach them this is a warning sign. What?
Just someone we want to avoid. Like if they have violent tendencies, if they're like,
Yes.
we avoid them at lunch.
Avoid them for the time being. But once they get the help they need, there's no reason to avoid them anymore. It's just okay. Let me put it this way. Let's say that a kid has incontinence and they're constantly shitting themselves, right?
Yes.
You're going to avoid that person because they stink.
Yes.
But it's not their fault, right? You just know that kid needs extra help.
That's a material health issue, though.
Okay, so is mental health, though. This is the
Yeah, but
biggest
shit
problem.
is like an obvious material health issue.
I'm trying
but
to
here's the
frame
thing,
this in
you
a
know,
way that makes more
him some
sense.
space, gang.
Sorry,
Give
go
him
ahead.
some space to finish, and then we can interrogate it. But
I'm
finish.
trying to make this more literal to make this make sense, because mental health it's intertwined with physical health. The biggest mistake the medical industry ever made was separating the two and acting like they're completely different things. The brain is a physical object. So if somebody's having a mental health crisis, that's a physical problem going on in their brain that they need help with. It's a real problem, just as real as if they have incontinence and they shit themselves. You know, you need to go and get that treated. That doesn't mean I want to sit next to you while you got to shit in your britches. But that does mean, hey, you know, maybe this kid should go see somebody for that so that we can take care of it. And that way, you know, people will be more likely to want to be around them because they won't be shitting themselves as much, or at least they have other methods to take care of that situation. You know what I mean?
Mhm.
And then teach kids, like, that doesn't make him a bad person just because he shits himself. It just means that he has different needs and you can still have fun with him and be around him.
Gotcha.
It's just going to be a little bit, you know, there's some things that you have to do.
Rezi, go.
About what? Like, are we supposed to just like be like? Are
Do
we
you
forcing
have an
kids to be
address? Do
friends
you
with
have-
like?
Solutions.
Are we forcing kids to be friend with the weird kid now? Is that like? Is
Yeah,
this the
yeah.
solution? Like this? Like,
I feel
oh
like
yeah,
you're- I
everyone
feel like
fucking
you're-
deserves friends. Okay, I'm sorry if you're a goth, you're gonna have to find your friends at another school.
You're
okay,
being very
this is like.
uncharitable. What I'm
you know,
saying,
but, like,
if you teach kids,
yeah.
this isn't about forcing. This is about
You-
encouraging.
No, this
you
is
can't
about
get in-group,
socialization.
out-group preferences. You
You
can't.
Who
can't
would've
force socialization.
This
Who
is
would have
not
known
forced
that the only way to
socialization.
get rid of
Hold on
bullying
one
is
second.
teach people?
Hold on one second. How about, like, I don't understand where you're
Good.
coming from, because teaching kids that being inclusive is good.
Yes,
That's not forced socialization. That's just
Uh-huh.
teaching them to be inclusive. That's
So
a basic lesson
They
we need
just
to
have
teach
to be
them.
kind of nice to them. That kid will, you know, like.
No,
what-
they should be a
I
dick to
see
them,
what you're
actually.
trying to
In fact,
say.
they should take their head by the hair and shove them into a toilet while there's
Uh-huh.
still shit in their pants.
Yeah, but like,
That's the good
but I think
solution.
that like, if I'm gonna be honest and like, you know, charitable with you, you're saying like a lot of these kids that are social outcasts effectively need support systems that go ahead and validate them, so that way they feel like they can get mental health care and that they aren't like different for getting mental health care, right?
Yes.
Okay, so then you want these weirdos to have friends effectively.
Everyone should have friends if they're in school, at least one.
Would
I
that
don't
be
think
called-
shelter
would that be
inherent.
called
I think
social
you could
security?
just be a misanthropic person who just doesn't want to interact with other people and is just there to.
I'm not
they're
saying it's a
ro-
perfect system.
I'm saying
and
there's
every,
robot people. Like
I'm
I've
not
met
saying every kid is going to be able to secure a social group. There's going to be a few that just miss the boat on that, and we have to deal with that as it comes. But this is about reducing incidents of social ostracization, and I feel like that's completely missed because you guys are so focused on like the idea that every single kid needs to have every other kid in the school be their friend. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying on a
Well,
large
there will
scale,
always
reduce
be
the
social
stigma. If you
ostracization.
reduce the stigma, then more people are more likely to be friends with that person and reduce their social ostracization.
But do
Kilo
you-
has, just real quick, Kilo's paid me $25 because he's angry and he wants on too. We're gonna give him some space, and I made money, so hooray! Gang, if you want to kick any of these new people off, the original guests are fine. But if you want to kick Kilo or Average Debate Enjoyer off, $50 and I'll do it for you. I'll yoink them right now. Capitalism, baby. Anyway, go ahead, Kilo. What's your thought here? Why did you want in so much that you paid me money?
Oh,
Wow.
there it is.
Dang.
I don't know what.
Wrecked.
Easiest $50 ever, huh?
No, I didn't remember.
Let me get my
Hold on.
solution out before I get kicked out.
Yeah. Okay,
Oh,
Kilo,
probably
try
not.
again.
Hey, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you, Wick. And I appreciate you grifting me for $25 real quick. Fairy Queen, hi. Love you. You're wrong. Rezi is the only person who's been consistently correct on this entire panel. The rest has been relatively infuriating. Alec, I know you've had a rough week with your whole Jubilee thing and like the public, perception of your appearance there. I'm going to be a little shitty to you. I know it's hard going on these shows. I apologize. I think that the mental health and policing and all these kinds of things are just red herrings for what you probably know is a more effective solution. The constitutional conversation is kind of boring. I agree, and it's good that you guys got that out of the way initially. I think most Americans are probably okay with some sacrificing of their constitutional rights given the public health emergency seriousness. So the question is whether you consider the gun problem to be serious enough to forsake some sort of constitutional right to try to mitigate it. And I think that what the New Mexico governor did was say, I'm identifying the guns as being the problem. Okay. So in order for me to disagree with what the New Mexico governor said, you have to substantiate to me that the guns are definitely not the problem. And you tried to do a series of things in order to do that. And one thing you did was say that I brought this up in a super chat, but you said that prohibition didn't work. That we had to demonstrate a time for you when a legislative ban didn't work. So what's your threshold of something having quote unquote worked?
My threshold of something having quote unquote worked. Well, I did backtrack a little bit on that and said, okay, well, maybe prohibition did have certain effects for a certain period of time because we had these husbands who were coming home, getting drunk, and then abusing their wife and kids, right? So when you take the alcohol away from them and make it harder to access, you effectively remove that method of, that mental state where they're more likely to be violent. So in that sense, it has an immediate positive effect. But then I believe that, the access to alcohol is a right that you should have as an adult. I believe in the decriminalization of all drugs. I think you should be allowed to have them. So if you are going to reintroduce alcohol at some point, you need to address the underlying issues that led to somebody coming home, drinking alcohol, and beating their wife and kids. And usually that's because of extended work hours, low pay, high stress, things like that.
Yeah, no argument here at all, right? Like there's obviously tons of underlying issues that contribute to a violence problem in general. I think the thing that Rezi was talking about, the infrastructure week, that thing is awesome. Like that's a great concept for something that can address the underlying issues that might contribute to people wanting to commit gun violence. But then you presented some hypotheticals where you're kind of saying, okay, the problem we're clearly trying to address is something like mass shootings, which in fairness are a relatively small portion of like gun deaths overall. But in trying to combat mass shootings, you say, okay, we have this guy who's sitting here getting radicalized on 4chan, alt-right boards and stuff like that. He has severe mental health issues, and we prevent him from having access to guns. What then? And there is no then. We prevented him, hopefully, from shooting a bunch of people. Mission accomplished. Like you walked yourself through why that is an effective solution. Not to mention, we started to go into this weird little tangent where you and Wick were kind of saying, well, if you remove the gun from these crazy...
I want to stop you for a sec, because like I said, I believe that having access to a gun is a right. So if you're going to it's the same thing as alcohol and prohibition. If you're going to take away alcohol for a brief period of time, during that brief period of time, if you address the issues that cause somebody to drink and then be abusive toward their wife, then you've solved the problem permanently without needing to permanently restrict people from having alcohol. You can do the same thing with guns. If you, and I just said that's a good compromise. If you temporarily take away guns and then solve the underlying issues that would lead to somebody taking a gun and committing a mass shooting or interpersonal violence or violence to themselves, you've solved the problem. And then you can reintroduce guns.
Yeah, so I generally agree. I think it seems, though, that in a lot of these conversations, people seem to think that the conversations surrounding a legislative ban on guns, even if it's temporary, they bring up a lot of talking points that make it sound like they're trying to say that it wouldn't work. So like one thing that you and Wick sort of delved into was saying that, well, you have these crazy people who are still going to pick a knife or like drive into a crowd of people with a car. And I'm sorry, but I can't remember any times off the top of my head where someone was able to kill 50 people with a knife at a concert.
We can
issue.
look at
Skill
large
issue.
Yeah, we could look at large issues where large incidents with cars and things like that where
I will
Not
admit,
even that. Just look at like bombings in the 60s and 70s.
I want to admit,
absolutely.
I did come into this conversation a little bit hot-headed on the issue, saying there's no way this can work, period, end of story. I also stated, though, that I'm open to hearing reasons that this would work. I'm open to hearing the evidence for it. So I've shifted my position a little bit throughout this conversation. I think that it could work. It could. If we do other things with it.
And just a intermission for a moment, gang, because I want to respect everyone's time. I want to give the initial people here a chance to have closing thoughts on the issue if they need to go, because I don't want to keep you hostage here. So I'm going to do that. You can stay if you'd like. We're obviously still going. And if you want on the show, because I'm trying to raise money for TwitchCon, so if you want on, $25 to get on, and if you want to kick someone that is not an original guest, $50 to do that today only. That's what we're doing. But it's making me money, and I want to make money. But I want to give everyone some final closing thoughts on this, because I know that I want to respect everyone's time. I said 2 hours. Clear on that. So you can stay if you like. This isn't me kicking you out. We're not ending the stream doing this. I'll start with Fairy Queen and we'll work our way around. Fairy Queen, go ahead.
So I'll just restate what I've stated throughout here. I think there are many things that we can do to help to reduce gun violence. Again, I still maintain my earlier position that more people should be able to identify the signs of somebody who is in imminent risk of perhaps committing gun violence. I understand that there are fears of stigmatization. I can just tell you as a teacher, I'm sorry, I hate to break it to all of you. Your teachers are already talked about all of you. Those conversations happen anyway, okay? Your teachers already notice the weird kid in the back of the room. The problem is your teachers are often unable to differentiate between what is a weird kid just simply going through a phase and what is behavior that is actually worthy of picking up the phone and calling mom at home. That's the issue. And the issue is that mom may not even know at home whether or not something concerning is happening. So I understand the concerns about stigmatization. I think that I think that it's already happening, A, anyway, and B, I think that the way that you can reduce that is by providing proper education for what specifically to look for, right? And also making sure that the education that you provide is age appropriate. I don't think that anybody should be going to a series of 5-year-olds and explaining to them, oh, how can you identify the weird kid? Let me give you a list to point that kid out, right? We're talking about people who are in charge of children, who are leaders and who are employees within the community. That's specifically what I was saying before. But secondly, I realize that everybody here is bored talking about the Constitution. Folks, I know that you're bored. I know that, like, talking about gun violence, I know everyone wants to talk about insincere gun legislation. The constitutional thing is a big deal. Allusions to public health emergencies have historically been used as excuses to try to invade the civil and personal rights of people throughout history. It happened post 9/11. It happened post Pearl Harbor. It happened in a private scale when Apple said that because we have a public health emergency of child pornography being on everyone's cell phone, that therefore means we are now going to survey your phone to find all of your pictures, to look through it. So
Not my dick pics.
you can think that that's boring. You can find it ridiculous to think about. But again, the reason why this matters, everyone thinks that it's a reasonable measure to suspend, to enforce quarantining, or to enforce masks in public during a mass pandemic. I don't know how many people here were comfortable seeing that reporter being arrested on the spot for no good reason other than being in the wrong place at the wrong time with a camera in his hand. And I think that's the reason why this overreach by the governor in Albuquerque matters. It matters because it is that reach. If you are angry and upset at the police officers for violating the law by refusing to follow the governor's orders, that's fine, but then bring that energy and that rage to the government and hope at the governor for executing an illegal and an unconstitutional executive order. That same energy should be matched for the governor as well as for the police.
I think it's personally, well, thank you for being here. Where can people find you?
Hi, I am Fairy Queen, not WhickTV. You can find me at Fairy Queen's Cottage on YouTube.
Thank you, gang. Go check her out. If one of my mods can link her in chat, and link everyone who gives their socials today, that would be a great help to me. I think it's a good thing when the police officers and military refuse to follow unlawful orders. I think that's good. I think they should continue to do so. Walter, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I wanted to say that I think Kilo came in here, said some really base stuff. I think when it does come to gun control, it's good to be honest about it. We can trample all over civil liberties, and that will lead to a complete reduction in gun violence. It will lead to a decrease. Whether or not that's worth it, or will gun rights affect my life all that much? I don't really Second Amendment entirely. It would not be the worst thing that happened to me, and if that led to a complete decrease in gun crimes, and everyone was using knives and all that stuff, I would definitely see that as a total improvement. I don't know if that's the most productive method. I think a lot of the talk about mental health care on this panel was definitely a lot of stuff that probably most people agree with. If you'd have to get some higher barriers behind getting a permit, having to go through some psych evals, stuff of that nature. I think a lot of us would agree with that. I think I've got the strange perspective of how I don't know, if we really want to stop all this school gun violence, and we don't really care about the gun violence that happens at home or between private individuals, then just we'll just get like TSA agents and TSA checkpoints at every school, and entering and exiting. If we can't touch the guns, if it's just not politically feasible, then I say that's the next best option, is we just get TSA checkpoints everywhere
Where can
we
people
go.
find you?
You guys can find me Twitter at the Supreme Chantian, or you can just look up Walter. I'm on kick.com at Walta World. You guys can find me there. That's where I stream. I do panel stuff, go over current events, things of that nature, and I play some games.
Put your links in my chat. Gang, give them a follow. Thank you for being here. 𝕵𝖎𝖎𝖙𝖘𝖍𝖔𝖜, what you got? Please keep these concise, gang.
What was that?
Try to keep these concise.
All right. So so for me, I think we touched on some other stuff like the mental health aspect. It's good. It's good to get a solid understanding of what the limitations of the Second Amendment actually are, because it doesn't seem like we have a framework to go by other than one that would seem to be permissible. For example, the Heller decision and the other decisions of the Supreme Court that were built off of that. It seems that limiting the places in which you're allowed to carry is a matter of it's permissible, but there are some differences in this one that I think are important to figure out if they're constitutional. Like, are you allowed to set a threshold for the application of these? For example, if you're going to have a crime that's based on the threshold of gun violence, is that permissible? I'm looking forward to seeing constitutionally where this goes on October 8th.
Yeah.
October 8th, when they go to the merits, because the only way to have a moral opinion on this is to assume that we have the right to bear arms, and then the morality would come from the either permissibility or infringement of your right to bear arms.
Where can people find you?
People can find me at kick.com/the and twitter.com/the.
Check them out, gang. Thank you for being here. Rezi, what you got?
Yeah, I like that you proved your misandry by only instituting time limits on our closing statements after the woman spoke. That was very nice of you, Wick. I appreciate that. I want to say this. Brevity is the soul of wit. It is simply that when we go ahead and make prescriptions towards very small contingents of the population on what they should do and not speak to the rest of the population, such as nurses, teachers, etc., and that's the ones that are the ones within that, we lose sight of what's actually at focus right now. We live in a hopeless society. There is no future. There is nothing for most people. We are seeing what happens when we have an ever increasing gap between the rich and the poor, where economic possibility is no longer realized. We can see that in all other developed countries that have high gun ownership, that is the one thing that we fail at, which is providing possibilities for our citizenry, for the people that are here, to be more than what they are, or at least do something at all that's going to make them want to live. And if we don't actually address these issues, and I think the only way we can address them is economically, then we are ultimately doing nothing. I would rather go ahead and preach to the choir than to preach to the preacher himself. Again, this is what we probably should have focused on. At the end of the day, guns are kind of cool, and I think that's gonna keep happening. Resurrect on all platforms. Do what you gotta do.
Resurrect, check them out, gang. With the based, nothing matters, and we can't do anything.
No,
about
we need
it.
to make things
Great.
matter.
Awesome.
All right, we need to do
Alec,
things that
Alec
matter.
Gunter,
We need to
go
make
ahead.
people believe again, Wick.
Alec Gunter,
Okay, if I can't make you
us
believe in
Stop.
God, I'll make you believe
Rezi,
in my
I'll make you believe
fucking
in the mute
violence
button
at
in a
least.
minute,
Goodbye.
Okay. Alec Gunter, make
Well,
us believe. Go ahead.
I have a little more optimistic view of the world, but I'll leave that aside for now. I think I have been swayed a little bit since the beginning. I came in, and to be clear, I don't talk about gun legislation a whole lot in general, but I was swayed. So I was swayed a little bit because I thought at first glance this looked really stupid. I still think that it could be improved, but I can see now how it might work if you do it correctly and if you actually address systems and injustices that lead to somebody committing those acts of violence in the first place. In the meantime, right? I agree with pretty much everything that Ferry something said. I'm sorry, I keep forgetting. Pretty much everything except for the constitutionality part. I think that does matter in as much as, you know, our Constitution obviously gives us a baseline of what our rights are. But when you're sitting here saying, you know, this is wrong because it violates my constitutional right, well, that's not why it's wrong. The constitutional right is there because violating it is wrong. You know, so it's wrong to restrict people's access to firearms indefinitely if there's no public crisis involving firearms, because people have the right to own them, regardless of what the Constitution says, in my moral principles, right? And you can have different moral principles on that. I think it'd be wrong if you disagree with that. But I guess that's where I come from. It's more a semantics thing than anything, but I feel like focusing on the Constitution just gets us nowhere. But at the end of the day, I think the core problems are mental health care, lack of access to it, along with lack of access to a variety of basic needs that leads to increased stress, depression, anxiety, and mental instability. So if you can increase access to those things, you will effectively prevent these mass shootings and interpersonal shootings from happening on a much wider scale. I feel like there's something else I want to add, but I'll just leave it at that. You can find me at twitch.tv/𝕬𝖓 and youtube.com/𝕬𝖓TTV.
TTV gang,
Yes.
check him out. Thank you for being here. Please
Thank you,
stay
and I'll
if
be
you
right-
want. Right, there's some people who want to address you. I've got more money for more people to come in. Keep giving
I will
me
be
money,
right
gang.
back.
Yeah, keep giving me money, gang. Keep donating, because we're gonna use all your donations to do some hedonism at TwitchCon if I can get enough money by the end of the month. If I can get enough money to go to TwitchCon by the end of the month, I'm gonna go do some hedonism and hang out and network and build up some relationships of trust over there. But you have to give me money, and I'm giving you good content, so give me money, sub, follow, like the stream, all that. Anyway, Red has paid $25 to get in, so we'll bring him in. Okay, with that, I'm done shilling. Let's open up the discussion. I wanted to toss it to the average debate enjoyer who says that he has a solution to this problem. So go ahead, hit us with your solution, friend.
First off, call me Tyler. It's a lot easier. Ferry, you want? Oh, she's leaving. Okay, cool. So in terms of solutions, the problem is criminals, not inanimate objects. I want to just kind of be blunt about that. We know how to reduce violent crime, and giving governors the ability to declare that public health threat when there isn't actually one declared by an official or anyone actually, and suspend the Bill of Rights is something that will lead to a pendulum swinging back. As I stated when I first came in, I could easily see somebody like DeSantis saying trans expression is harming children, so we need to suspend the First Amendment protected free expression clause because we need to help our children. So this same logic can be applied. It's not smart. It's not good. It's something you do not want to start going down. Second, we keep talking about just giving people better economic opportunities. Violent criminals are basically just Aladdin, and if they had a better job, they wouldn't be Aladdin anymore. It's just not how reality works, unfortunately. So first off, I want to focus on the fact here that we have been talking about mass shootings, and these are like active shooter events in schools. This makes up less than 1% of violent homicides caused by guns, and way less than 1% of violent gun crimes in general. It's like a very, very tiny thing to focus on as hard as people have here. And then the solutions to that have been like teachers reporting, whereas if you look at the Parkland shooter, 36 times teachers reported him, 24 times the police were at his house. The FBI was involved 2 times. Nothing stopped him. So just saying having more teachers report is going to fix the problem. It didn't in Parkland, and that was very recent. So I kind of want to get unfocused on that and go back to actual violent crime, which we know how to solve. We have 30 years of data that tough policing in areas that have high violent crime bring violent crime down. Now, the dude that's not here right now alluded to a 5-day strike in New York City in 1971, where 6,000 police officers more were still on the job. Only some police officers went on strike, and it was for 5 days. It's not anything even close to being able to debunk 30 years of crime data that we have, that tough policing in violent neighborhoods brings down crime rates. The same thing we saw when you see stop and frisk go away, the gun crimes spike up. When you see bail reform, violent crimes spike up. You cannot just blame violent crime on the fact that people root causes. You don't have enough money, so go out and rape. That doesn't make any sense when you start to think about it. So the solution is not more laws, because we already have the laws in the books. Gun crime's already illegal. Murder's already illegal. Violent crime's already illegal. Putting more laws in the books to people that are already ignoring the laws isn't going to cause less laws or less gun crime. Most of the people committing gun crimes obtain their gun illegally. Now, I looked at an ATF study when I was prepping this statement. 54% of guns used in crimes were at one point purchased legally within 3 years of being used in a gun grab. Most of them were stolen. Most of them were not in the hands of the person that purchased them legally anymore. I don't know how they were stolen, if they were sold illegally on the black market, whatever. But most guns used in gun crimes were not obtained legally when they were using by the person they were using the crime by. Again, 54% were at one point. So the problem here isn't more laws. People are breaking laws to get the guns in the first place. People are using the guns illegally in the first place. Passing more laws is not going to bring it down.
Okay. What we got, gang? Red, welcome.
Hello, thank you.
Okay.
So I was wondering about this because I was like listening for a while, and I'm sorry if it came up beforehand, but I think Alec was bringing it up, that mental health has to be like the first step in solving the problem. And I think like mental health is probably the biggest issue causing like mass shootings. Obviously, I think everyone agrees on that. I don't see how I don't see how this order is like super crazy ridiculous. As a Canadian, you Americans are ridiculous with your guns. But I do think that's like kind of reversing the order of events. Like I think it's way easier to like control guns than it is to suddenly make mental health services work. Like I think the mental health services thing, there's like a lot of steps and a lot of legislation, probably building more buildings, hiring new people, training new people up. Whereas like giving the police a few more extra things to do to control the amount of guns around is like, it's a very good like band-aid for the initial time. And as for the slippery slope argument, I don't think this is a precedent for, like, it's a precedent for the same thing to happen in other places, I think, especially if it goes up to, like, the Supreme Court, right? Which I think I've heard people mention that might happen. And then it becomes a precedent for if gun violence becomes this bad in other states, and then they can enact the same thing. I do not see the parallel of, like, if this goes through, then DeSantis gets to, like, get rid of trans people. Like, I don't see the connection there at all.
Trans expression, First Amendment expression of who you feel you are inside. That's more what I meant. Suspend free expression because a right-winger decides that trans rights
we can look at other examples, right? Like, I don't want this to turn into a trans debate. We're not going to do a trans debate on this. Okay, it's just not going to happen. But we can use other
I understand it's about the Constitution, but yeah.
Well, I just want to say, like, like I said, I have
the effect of it to where like doesn't really much matter about setting a precedent in Florida. This is like a state law, the state legislature that's happening in New Mexico. But what he is referring to is. Oh, okay.
Finish, Walter.
Oh yeah, but there is a certain aspect to where it is the fact that like if we're okay with this aspect of like something that is like slightly a politicized subject, and we have the executive branch coming in and able to like essentially enact emergency powers to do this type of thing. But you could say that Trump already did kind of some kind of precedent when he created like a military emergency to build the wall down at Mexico. But the whole thing is that these aren't necessarily the same kind of precedent. Since this is Florida, then that's New Mexico, then that's the federal government. These are state level governments. It's not the same kind of precedent that you might get like from courtroom to courtroom on the same court circuit.
Yeah, exactly. That's basically what. Sorry, go ahead, Alex.
No, it's fine. I wanted to address a couple of things you said, because like I said, I did shift my position a little bit from the beginning. I do think that a temporary gun suspension could work if it is implemented properly and the underlying causes of these violent actions are addressed in the meanwhile. As far as like the constitutionality works, and like should we be able to suspend like freedom of expression or whatever, you'd have to prove that that's an actual threat, right? And guns clearly pose an actual threat in many regards. So I feel like that's you can't just say, well, if we ban one thing, why don't we ban everything else? you know, we ban certain things because they pose an active threat to other people's freedoms. So, you know, freedom of expression really, in most circumstances, is not threatening other people's rights.
Yeah. So things become illegal. Go ahead.
No, go
Whoever
ahead,
was going to.
Kilo, go.
Well, okay. So
you
things
have your
become
lawyer
illegal.
going.
Yeah, I have to go in a second. Things become illegal when it is determined that society is probably incapable of handling it responsibly on their own. So most people probably can drive, you know, 90 miles an hour on surface streets, like perfectly reasonably well. But it's not worth the risk of them going careening off into the sidewalk and nailing a pedestrian. So we impose like a speed limit. That's like a really simple example of a time when it's like, okay, I think you'd like to be able to enjoy the right of being able to drive however fast you'd like, but obviously humans have demonstrated that they're probably incapable of handling this and the government has to step in. The reason why people get hung up specifically with guns is because it's in the Constitution, but the Constitution doesn't establish these immutable, universal, like moral guidelines that we should live by. It's just what we decided at some point. So the question should be, how much do I care about the issue that this is presenting here versus how much I'm willing to sacrifice my constitutional rights? And I think people should be able to reasonably look at a country that has such a gun-centric culture like America and say maybe the gun culture has overstayed its welcome. I think that if someone had a nuke, this is totally stupid, forgive me. I think if someone had a nuke, you wouldn't be saying, well, it's not the inanimate object, it's the person who wants to commit. No, it's the nuke. Like, we should probably keep people from having something like that, right?
Just for the record, I don't think that's dumb at all. That is the natural extreme endpoint, right? I think that's a great point.
Okay. Yeah. And Alec, I appreciate the fact that it does seem like your needle moved a little bit. I just want to push back on the people who seem to think that, or like I said, in these arguments, they tend to present this side of things that's like, these things won't do anything to address the problem. I think if you're willing to say, it's not enough of a problem to me to what we're, you know, compared to what we're sacrificing, which is like self-defense, protection against government tyranny, things like that. That's fine. And I wish you would say that, not you necessarily, but people who oppose this. But saying that introducing legislative bans, you know, whatever it is, wouldn't do anything to mitigate the gun violence problem, I think is like objectively untrue. And I think it's a ridiculous way to talk about this.
You're about to explode. Debate enjoyer. Go ahead. Give him a...
Oh, no. That's kind of like what I addressed in my point is like most gun crimes are committed with illegal guns. So passing more gun laws to restrict legal gun owners who most of the time don't do anything like a concealed carry permit, the person that has that is 6 times less likely to commit a crime than the average United States citizen. So like these are the most law-abiding people out there. To punish them when most gun crimes are committed with illegal guns, just it baffles.
I don't think that's true. I don't think that's true.
I got an ATF study I can send you. I got it pulled up right now.
Well, if you're going for responsible gun ownership, right? If I'm a responsible, and this is just me personally, if I'm a responsible gun owner, which I am, I don't have a concealed carry, but let's say I do, and I'm out in public with my concealed carry, and then there's this problem of people with, going out in public with their guns and committing mass violence, and the government steps in and says, well, we're doing a temporary gun ban, right? To solve this problem of people not being responsible with their guns in public. As a responsible gun owner, I would say, okay, you know what? I can understand that. A temporary ban, right? That would be reasonable to me. Now, if instead I was like, well, what are you talking about? That's my right as an American citizen to carry a gun wherever the fuck I want. I feel like that's less reasonable, and you're really not considering all of the, even if you disagree, you're not even considering all of the aspects of the argument first. You know what I mean? Like, it's fine if you disagree. I disagreed initially in this conversation with the whole thing, but I think that's just a reasonable thing for a responsible gun owner to do.
Well, so average debate enjoyer, I just have like a quick question. So like I understand that most of these things are committed by people who like steal guns, that these gun crimes are committed by. But like even if we drastically reduce the amount of guns in circulation, if we made like even being caught with a gun like a 20-year offense, like obviously that would like reduce some of the gun violence, right? That would like bring down the numbers by a lot. If like just even owning a gun was like a 20-year sentence immediately. Yeah, of course. So like that's the whole point, that it can be that they're like these outliers, these people who steal guns, but it's like if we overall reduce the amount in circulation, that it will lead to less gun deaths. It is like that's just 1-to-1.
We're looking for practical solutions, though, and are you going to be able to get 2/3 of the states to sign on to reforming the entire Second Amendment? Is that practical, or is it practical to punish the people that are breaking the law?
Well, that's
mean,
that's
do you
the
have to
reason to have
reform the
a
Second
executive
Amendment?
order.
We were
be
talking
followed.
about to take away everyone's guns, you would have to rework the Second Amendment. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wait,
yeah,
no.
Oh yeah,
this
but
is
can't you
this
just do like
seems
gun turn-in programs and stuff? And like most people just turn in their guns then, like a lot of the time. Like you can take a
Nope.
lot of guns like
Nope.
off the streets without doing that.
Nope.
No, is that not the thing?
Nah, gun buybacks don't
My,
really work.
Nope.
have I
No.
been leftist pilled by propaganda?
They
A lot of
go
time,
on.
people will print guns offline and then sell them to the gun buybacks and scam the city out of money.
Yep.
Oh shit! Oh, with 3D printers, that's crazy. All right,
Yeah,
I'm gonna
yeah,
remember
exactly.
Well, there
that.
was
Gotta
a
remove
there
this
was an
video.
issue in
Need a quick
India,
buck.
Yeah, they-
right, where they started
Pretty much.
paying people to kill vipers. I think it was vipers, and so a lot of Indians started raising vipers so that they could kill them and then sell them to the government, right? Like it's kind of that kind of thing, right? $5 for Fondue to say, did we forget the 1.5 year long 2-week lockdown? And I think that this speaks to the if I may, right? This idea that there are going to be harms, even if we say that instituting a ban or instituting some sort of like a buy fiat kind of program to get rid of guns or to criminalize guns, etc. Even if that will reduce deaths from guns, there are going to be after effects to that. There are going to be, we are putting more power in the hands of the state. And that is going to be a problem because the state has demonstrated over and over and over again that they generally aren't very good stewards of certain amounts of power and certain types of power. They tend to abuse it. And the people who feel that abuse, right? Gun control laws are most heavily enforced in minority areas, right? Gun control laws are most heavily enforced in areas that have the least amount of power and the least amount of backing. And if we believe that the system is systemically and institutionally biased or racist, why would we give those same institutions and systems more power to take away basic civil liberties and rights, such as gun ownership, First Amendment, etc.? Why would we ever do that? Please.
The first gun control laws were post-slavery to prevent black people in the South that were newly freed slaves from having guns so they can defend themselves from the first iteration of the KKK.
Yeah. I think, okay, so I, like, again, as a Canadian, I'm coming into your guys' gun culture boggles my mind sometimes, but the Second Amendment primarily exists to be able to defend yourself against the state, correct? I think that like currently military, like I don't think anyone or any militia can amass enough firepower to like deal with the firepower that the state can levy against them. So I feel like that's kind of a like a non-starter for like as an actual defense of the Second Amendment. But I also think that that's fair. I would love to hear the counter argument. But I also think that the Second Amendment is like the rights given to you by the amendment is given to you by the state. It's definitely a thing that like you should start like seeing red flags going off when they start doing stuff to like take your guns away from you. But why do you like put so much weight on something written by paper given to you by the state? You know what I mean? Like, why not, like, having the backup armory or whatever hidden or whatever is like fine, and that makes sense to me as a thing to defend yourself against it. But I don't think it's like you let me have this thing so I can fight you is like a very strong defense.
Well, it's not like I don't put stock into the, oh, we're going to use our guns to overthrow the government. I think that's silly if the government's correct. I agree with you on that. But having a gun available in your home to fight off an intruder is something that's a pretty reasonable thing. There are instances
I'm 100%
where
on board.
absolutely you would want to have a gun for self-defense, because taking away the guns, right, is going to just put more power in the hands of the strong and take it away from the weak. If no one has guns, then suddenly big strong men, like, oh, it fucks over disabled people. It fucks over women, right? It just
is the great equalizer.
Yeah. So again,
but
like this idea that taking away guns is going to make women and the disabled more safe isn't necessarily true. Now, there is a problem with mass shootings. There is a problem with gun violence in general, right? But what are the solutions to those? That's a harder question. I think when it comes to the ban, and I'm giving my opinion here since the panel's over, we're just kind of in the after show now. The ban is bullshit. We do not want to give governors or state actors the ability to supersede the Bill of Rights, right? And just because there happens to be an emergency. I would accept a lot of violence rather than give up my First Amendment rights, for example, or my voting rights, for example. Like, there are a lot of rights that even if people were dying, I think that the right to do this thing supersedes that threat. It's safety versus freedom. And maybe I find I land on the side of freedom more than most, but that's just...
Well, I
So,
think
I'm-
safety and freedom are intertwined intimately, because if you have greater safety, that means that you have the freedom to do more things, right? Like, let's say, for instance, there were no speed limits and people could drive as fast as they wanted. So this technically increases the freedom that I have to drive as fast as I want. But ultimately, we are reducing the overall freedom of the society, because the result of that is going to be I slide into a public school and crash into a bunch of kids or something like that, right? So we are reducing the overall free, because if you kill somebody, they're no longer free, right? So this is a matter of optimizing freedom, of maximizing it, I should say. My chat does want me to leave and do a react, but I'll sit and I put it up to a poll.
No, you can leave.
I want to respond. I want to hear some responses, and then I'll leave.
So I'm like, me personally, I'm not okay with the idea of throwing out a fundamental right that is supposed to be guaranteed to us by the Bill of Rights. This is why I'm a fan of putting something like this forward and then letting the judicial system decide if it is a breach of our rights. If it's not, then we know. But also, if it is, then we know. My arguments have not been get rid of the Second Amendment. My arguments have not been to trade these fundamental rights that we have as a mandatory buy-in for ourselves in the society of America, to trade those for any level of security. Now, there might be limitations that exist. There are limitations that exist that are well within that fundamental right that we have. And as I said before, the Heller decision said that it is not absolute, and you don't have a right to bring your gun anywhere and everywhere. And there are limitations that are allowed to be placed on just the right to own a gun. So your right to have a gun does not necessarily mean your right to bring your gun everywhere that you want to. And now, where the lines between those exist is where I'm excited to see the conversation go when it comes to these court cases.
Walter, what you got?
I gotta get my
Okay,
cat
so
meds.
Wick, I guess I'd like to disagree with some of what you were saying to a certain degree.
Please.
I do think our Bill of Rights should be definitely like maintained and defended, but I think there are definitely a lot of instances, a lot of examples where there are certain emergencies where a lot of things just emergency powers do need to be enacted. I believe like in the executive being able to enact emergency powers to act more fluidly and almost like kind of like dictator-like in order like extreme situations. I do think that there are justifications for that, and that's why like I do like the that I'm able to vote that person out if I don't think that the emergency was proportional to the response. Obviously, I don't necessarily agree with this gun ban. I don't really agree with this. I don't think it's going to do much. It's not really limiting sales. It's not limiting permits. It's just limiting people being outside with the guns. I don't agree with it or the emergency that spawned it, but I do agree with the like kind of the inherent idea of our executive powers need to have some ability to suspend rights during extreme emergencies. I don't think we can list out every type of emergency and when that dictates which right to be forsaken. There are just a lot of instances that are just things just come up. We can't write them all out. There are going to be things that we can't think of in 20 years that we never, like crypto hacker guy takes over the Eiffel Tower or something. You know, like we'll never be able to figure this stuff out. There's just going to be countless things that there needs to be certain situations where the executive can step in.
Fair enough.
I'm
Just
gonna
before
head
everyone
out.
goes, right? So next week, speaking of React, we're going to have Turkey Tom on next week to talk about the ethics of React content. Is it okay to take other people's work, then react to it as your own? We'll find out. But thanks for coming, gang. It has been an interesting discussion. We are probably going to just to head out. But yeah, any final thoughts from anyone before we shut this shit down?
You Americans are crazy with your guns.
That's true. And also,
Gravy covered in French fries.
Respectfully.
Gravy covered in French fries. No one talk to us like that.
Very true.
As some people may
True.
know, I was on Jubilee and had a very controversial performance. I have done a lot of reflecting since then, and I am attempting to come into these conversations more open-minded and charitable towards other people's positions. So I am glad that I was able to kind of see other people's points of view tonight. I'm going to do my best to do that moving forward. So, and also, Wick, thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate the invite, and I hope to be on some more of these in the future.
Reach out and we'll make it happen. But for now,
yeah, of course.
I'll see you guys later. Gang, who we raiding out to? Who's we going to? Who are we? Chat, tell me. Where are we going?
All right, good night, everybody.
Good night.
Take her easy. Thanks for having me, Wick.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Wick.
See ya.
No.
Console Stardust. You know what? Well, Dami Llama, we're gonna just remove you. Okay, wow. Yeah. Let's see. You know what? Rezi rated us recently. I feel like we should return the favor, no? We should probably raid Rezi? Yeah? Let's raid Rezi. But, yeah. I think that while, yes, emergencies are an issue and the state should have some more power than they normally do, there are certain lines that in no instances, 0 instances, the state should cross. I think that the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments of the Constitution, are a good starting point for places that the government, under no conditions, should ever go. First Amendment being the first and most important. I think that we should have hard lines in the sand that even if there is a quote-unquote emergency, that we should not be allowing the state to take away our ability to speak against it, for example. Yeah. Now, you can disagree on various of the amendments. Like, a lot of people say the Second Amendment should be adjusted. And gang, we have the ability to do that. It's baked in. We just need to get a constitutional convention going. Okay? Easier said than done, of course. But for now, we're going to raid out. We are going to go to 𝕍𝖎. Make sure you let him know that this is a hate raid. And I'll see you guys next week on Monday, 6 p.m. Eastern. Well, actually, 7 p.m. Eastern. 7 p.m. Eastern, Monday, we're going to have Merc off the perk on. And we're going to be talking to her. That's not going to be on Twitch because she's banned on Twitch. It'll be on YouTube and Kick. So check us out then. Okay. I will see you guys later. Bye.